American Comics. My Warhammer Simulator Chapter 621 to 640. Boom, boom, boom. At this moment, as the distance between the two sides narrowed, almost every ethereal guard around Ethereal in War seemed to have lost their minds. They brandished their shimmering honor blades, charging ferociously towards Rorschach. However, for the Tau, whose close combat abilities were, to put it mildly, weak, Rorschach, a veteran of countless battles, revealed his razor-sharp claws like a lion charging into a flock of sheep. Flying at low altitude, he merely swung the blood scythe a few times. This melee weapon from the Necrons completely cleaved apart most of the ethereal guards. Even as the remaining ethereal guards' melee weapons crashed heavily against the adamantium armor, sending sparks flying, Rorschach remained unharmed. The next second, an adamantium magnetic boot landed heavily. Rorschach abruptly used Shadow Step to move forward. His towering form instantly transformed into a wisp of dark shadow, swiftly sneaking behind Ethereal in War. Buzz, buzz, buzz. At that moment, Ethereal in War, gripping two equalizers tightly, only had time to activate the destructive force field on the weapons. And as the shield force field around its body shattered with a bang, the blue head of the opponent, with an expression of incomparable sorrow, was forcibly cleaved off by a fleeting, brilliant green light. Crackling sounds. At this moment, Rorschach, rapidly driving his power armor forward, relied on the indestructible nature of adamantium. He withstood the layers of destructive force fields that had not yet completely dissipated around the corpse, and bent down to pick up Ethereal in War's blue head from the sand. Roar. Immediately afterward, wearing a skull helmet, he didn't say a word. Instead, he stood in place and abruptly raised the Ethereal's head above him. At the same time, from beneath the helmet, an uncontrollable roar of victory echoed through the sandstorm. At this moment, whether it was the Raven Guards still fighting, or the Ethereal Guards thrown into chaos by the death of the Ethereal, almost everyone cast their gazes, either filled with fanatical worship or utter despair, towards Rorschach's location. Damocles Gulf, the mining planet Prefectia. Primarch Rorschach led the Raven Guard's 5th Company, successfully beheading the Tau Empire's Ethereal in War, bringing the first glimmer of victory to the human empire, which had been suffering setbacks since the beginning of this war. Now that Ethereal in War was dead, even though the remaining Ethereal Guards, after a brief period of chaos, quickly launched suicidal assaults on all enemies around them, Rorschach, having completed his mission, had no intention of getting too entangled with these Tau. Soon after the Thunderhawk transport squadron, circling back and forth in the sandstorm, used its heavy airborne firepower to completely clear the remaining aliens from the surface, Rorschach ordered the Raven Guard to collect the Ethereal's headless corpse and melee weapons. Immediately leading the Astartes, who had only suffered a few casualties, he successfully evacuated this storm-ridden mining planet before more Tau reinforcements arrived seeking revenge. And as time went on, the Tau Empire fleet, still attacking the mining planet, was successfully repelled by the combined fleet of the Raven Guard and the White Scars, temporarily ending this battle. However, the Tau forces that had successfully landed quickly changed their mission plan. They instead began to build fortresses on the mining planet, even capturing Imperial fortresses. And, as expected, the information about Ethereal in War's death must have reached the Tau Empire's 3rd expansion Supreme Commander, Shadosun. Then, only two options awaited the human empire. Either the Tau Empire would fall into chaos due to the death of the Ethereal, begin to withdraw its lines, and return home, or a retaliatory counterattack from the Tau Empire would gradually unfold towards the Empire's territories. In short, the battles ahead would be difficult and costly for the Raven Guard and the sparsely populated White Scars. Inside the upper decks of the battle barge Avenger, Rorschach, wearing power armor, was being assisted by a Raven Guard tech marine, personally skinning and deboning Ethereal in War's head, then carefully plating it with a layer of silver metal. He did this for two reasons. 1. To preserve this rare alien leader collectible for a long time. 2. To better provoke the Tau on future battlefields, causing them to lose their footing. Primarch, White Scars Chapter Master Khosrow Khan requests an audience. At that moment, accompanied by the sound of approaching footsteps, Chapter Master Severax, driving black power armor, slowly walked towards Rorschach from behind. Rorschach, with a calm expression, slightly turned his head. He handed the silver ethereal skull in his adamantium hand to the tech marine on the side, signaling him to continue refining it. Then he stared at Chapter Master Severax and said, Let him come, it's good timing, we can also discuss the battle plan together. As Rorschach's voice fell, Chapter Master Severax gently waved his hand at a nearby mortal crew member, who immediately ran out of the ship's cabin. Soon after, Khosrow Khan, who had accidentally lost an arm in the previous boarding action, swung his newly replaced mechanical prosthesis and came before Rorschach. Respected Primarch, the White Scars, 3rd Company offers you greetings from the Koros Highlands, wishing you to soar like an eagle on the steppes. At this moment, Khosrow Khan, driving power armor, wanted to kneel on one knee. But the silent gaze from Rorschach and the Primarch's rules mentioned in the past made the other party subconsciously change to a salute with one hand on the chest. Well, I haven't been to your White Scars yet, nor have I seen the Koros Highlands. I will definitely go and see them when I have the chance. Also, let me give you an exciting news. Some time ago, a friend of mine, or rather, a comrade in arms, has seen Jagadai Khan. He is unharmed, but unwilling to return to the Empire. You descendants can rest assured for the time being. At this moment, Rorschach slightly raised his chin. He said calmly to Khosrow Khan in front of him, "Thank you, Primarch." The next moment, Khosrow Khan, whose expression was obviously excited, couldn't help but kneel on one knee towards the Primarch. In order to express the various emotions surging in his heart, Rorschach sighed helplessly. He changed the subject and slowly asked the two people in front of him, "All right, we should talk about serious business. The Damocles Gulf War has continued until now, except for a few battles that have achieved brief victories, and the beheading of Ethereal in war, there has been basically no major achievement. What are your thoughts now? You can say them and let me hear them." Faced with the Primarch's question, Khosrow Khan, who slowly stood up, exchanged a glance with Chapter Master Severax. They cautiously expressed their thoughts. That was to design a trap on the mining planet that had not yet been captured. Using intelligence information, they would lure Shadowsoon himself to come and assassinate him, and seize the Ethereal's head. And if anyone was currently the most hated Imperial figure by the Tau Empire and even Shadowsoon, then it was only Primarch Rorschach, who had personally cut off Ethereal and Wur's head. However, Chapter Master Severax and Khosrow Khan did not dare to explicitly ask the Primarch to be their bait. In the end, the knowing Rorschach himself made this important decision. After all, if they wanted to completely extinguish the Tau Empire's ambitious expansion war this time, just one Ethereal in Wur's head was probably not enough. The Kauyan is an ancient warfare doctrine deeply rooted in the traditions of the Tau Empire. The term itself embodies the dual concepts of patience and hunter. Therefore, the Kauyan strategy is essentially divided into two core components. Firstly, hunting the enemy, and secondly, setting a trap. Even though Rogue and the others were unfamiliar with the cultural practices of the Tau Empire, the Astartes, tempered by countless battles, were implementing their own, more familiar form of ambush. Orchestrating a Kauyan in the name of the Imperium of Man. Buzzing, accompanied by the deep thrum of numerous displacement engines, a series of white-painted Thunderhawk transporters ascended from the flight deck of the White Scars battle cruiser. Led personally by Khosrow Khan, the 3rd Company of the White Scars, laden with repulsor vehicles and land speeders, descended towards the storm-racked surface of the mining planet. Subsequently, the White Scars fleet altered course, heading along a void lane that led away from the mining planet. Ostensibly, their purpose was to obey the orders of the War Council and reinforce another battlefield on a different planet. But in reality, it was a ploy to lure the Tau Empire fleet into a return engagement. Concurrently, the Raven Guard exploited the Tau Empire's notorious talent for intercepting intelligence. They, accidentally, leaked the crucial information that Primarch Rogue had landed on the mining planet, even helpfully adding that the Primarch himself had beheaded the Ethereal. Thus, the vital bait to attract Shadowsoon had been cast. Whether she would take it, and whether the ambush would succeed, was known only to the God Emperor. However, to make the ambush more convincing, and to reclaim the half of the mining planet seized by the Tau Empire, in addition to the White Scars assault force and the lurking Raven Guard, Rogue also personally led the Lamenter's Guard and the remaining 22 Black Templars in a landing on the planet's surface. They launched a swift offensive against the planetary fortress held by the Tau Empire. Buzzing. At this moment, Rogue, straining to drive his power armor forward in a charge, subtly shifted his magnetic boots. In a flash, a railgun projectile, screaming through the air, narrowly missed his Oromite shoulder guard. It slammed into the sandy depths behind him, sending up a cloud of rock and debris. The very next moment, Rogue abruptly raised an Oromite hand. The metal 10 rings suspended in midair, as if feral beasts spotting prey. Swiftly unleashed a relentless barrage against the railgun emplacement as it adjusted its firing angle. Simultaneously, Rogue rotated his skull helmet and violently combined the Oromite wings on the back of his power pack into a propulsion unit. His magnetic boots slammed against the ground, and he rocketed into the air. He charged headlong towards 3 crisis battlesuits about to land. Crack! In an instant, the blood scythe, a blur of green lightning, effortlessly cleaved the Tau crisis battlesuits into falling scraps of metal. Just as Rogue was about to dive on another target, the sudden appearance of several hover tanks caused heavy casualties among the Lamenter's guard. Boom, boom, dozens of solid shells, leaving clear trails, hurtled through the air with a terrifying roar. They concentrated their fire on the Terminators who couldn't evade. Even Terminator armor, far superior to standard power armor, was instantly torn apart. The Astartes inside the Terminator armor were killed instantly. Boom, boom, boom. The next moment, Rogue descended from the sky, slamming down on the turret of a hover tank. The blood scythe in his hand had already severed a long barrel. As pulse rifle beams and railgun slugs rained down, Rogue, tilting his skull helmet slightly, abruptly raised his Oromite arms. Without hesitation, he unleashed a terrifying kinetic blast. Crackle! A miniature storm of kinetic energy rippled outwards in all directions. Even the Tau pilots hiding inside the hover tanks were subjected to the terrifying resonance of the armor, shattering them into pulped flesh. After the 3 hover tanks and many drones ceased firing and shut down, Rogue, holding the blood scythe, raised an Oromite hand. He roared to the Lamenter's guard around him, firing their bolters. For the Emperor. For Rogue, accompanied by the near-bestial roars of the Lamenters. They swiftly engaged their Terminator armor and launched a terrifying charge towards the forward tide wall platform. Hiss! At this moment, Rogue, just having leapt down from the hover tank, was struck by a series of terrifying ion accelerator blasts on the side of his power armor. Even though the energy intensity was far from enough to breach the Oromite shell, the continuous energy blasts pushed Rogue's towering form against the edge of the hover tank's armor, immobilizing him for a moment. At the same time, accompanied by the whine of engines, a 7-meter-tall 15104 Riptide battlesuit led a squad of 3-meter-tall 1586 Cold Star battlesuits, descending from the sky and swiftly surrounding the gold power armor being suppressed by heavy fire. In the name of the greater good, by order of Commander Shadosun, Human Commander, Oshusera will be your ultimate nemesis. Avenge Anva. In an instant, a stilted utterance in Imperial High Gothic came from within the alternatingly firing battlesuits. Rogue, enduring the heavy energy suppression, felt no panic or fear. He simply gritted his teeth, straining to activate his power armor, and slightly adjusted his stance. Then, without hesitation, Rogue unleashed his accumulated kinetic blast towards his enemies. Boom! With a cloud of dust and sand, the spreading kinetic energy instantly disrupted the terrifying firepower from the Riptide and Cold Star battlesuits. Rogue, taking a deep breath inside his skull helmet, gripped the blood scythe in his hand. He violently activated his power armor, now free to move, and immediately charged towards the Riptide battlesuit. Immediately following, metal 10 rings streaked through the air. They launched a piercing attack against the Cold Star battlesuits, leaping backwards. Buzz buzz buzz. Layers of constantly vibrating and shaking shield force fields suddenly appeared in the dust-filled air. Cold Star battlesuits, relying on the experimental Eclipse shield generators, withstood the fierce impacts from metal Octarius rings. The massive Riptide battlesuit also quickly detached 2 missile drones from its body. They launched a fierce barrage of small missiles at Rorschach, who was about to reach them. However, at this moment, Rorschach, who was practically wielding the blood scythe in his palm into a dazzling halo, actually relied on his reaction speed to directly split each small missile, which had not yet detonated nearby, in half from the warhead. The next second, as many small missiles landed and exploded in sympathetic detonations, Rorschach, charging forward swiftly, successfully entered the range to launch a close combat attack. He gripped the blood scythe in his palm tightly. The green light-wreathed sharp blade rapidly slashed at the Nova shield that had just bloomed around the massive body of the Riptide battlesuit. Chi. Instantly, a large amount of shield energy fragments, flung outward and scattered, disappeared into the turbid air. The Riptide battlesuit, which had just activated its jetpack to jump backward, did not completely distance itself. It was cleaved off a mechanical leg, filled with complex mechanical structures and countless precision circuits, by a fleeting, dazzling green light. At the same time, relying entirely on the toughness of the adamantium power armor, and enduring a large amount of firepower from the Cold Star battlesuits, Rorschach unhesitatingly activated the pair of propulsion devices located behind the power armor. His entire body quickly leapt high into the air. Then, he slammed hard into the Riptide battlesuit, which was trying to create distance and re-initiate the attack. Boom! Accompanied by a deafening roar of intense metal collision, Rorschach's towering body crashed heavily into the Riptide battlesuit's massive body. The blood scythe, suddenly swung up from beside him, had completely embedded itself in the Riptide battlesuit's thick armor, directly destroying the opponent's jetpack. In an instant, the two, with their vastly different sizes, rapidly fell heavily towards the ground. They successfully splashed up countless sand and gravel that drifted away with the wind. Crack! Reacting swiftly, Rorschach immediately used his magnetic boots to firmly attach himself to the Riptide battlesuit's armor surface. He violently activated the power armor, drawing back the blood scythe, which had sliced open a layer of thick armor, from his palm. Once again, he launched a continuous slashing attack towards the Riptide battlesuit's thick chest armor. At the same time, Dark Fury Guardians, leaping out from the surrounding shadows on the ground, quickly launched stealth attacks against the Cold Star battlesuits. On the completely destroyed Riptide battlesuit, a Tau head, its eyes seemingly filled with unwillingness and anger, gradually appeared within Rorschach's visor range. The ruthless Rorschach did not hesitate in the slightest. He abruptly activated his power armor, kneeling on one knee. Then, he forcefully extended an adamantium hand and grabbed the somewhat slender neck of this male Tau. The next second, accompanied by a sudden roar from within Rorschach's skull helmet, a blue head, seemingly still connected to half a section of snow-white spine, was forcibly pulled out from inside the damaged Riptide battlesuit. "Commander Shadowsoon, is it? If you have the guts, come yourself. I'll be waiting for you on this planet." At this moment, Rorschach, holding up the blue head in his palm, slightly shook his skull helmet. He looked down at the battlesuit detection system, which was still transmitting battlefield data, and said in a low voice. Immediately afterward, Rorschach raised his heavy magnetic boots. He heavily stomped on the detection system in front of him, which was emitting a faint red light. Soon after, with the sudden cessation of bolter fire, the Cold Star battlesuits scattered around were also quickly annihilated by the emotionless Astartes. Rorschach, driving the power armor and jumping off the Riptide battlesuit, merely waved his hand, signaling the Dark Fury Guardians to collect the Tau battlesuits. Then, he immediately sped towards other battlefields that were taking place not far away. If there were no accidents, Oshova, who came to assassinate Rorschach this time, was a bait thrown out by the cunning Shadowsoon for reconnaissance purposes. It was also their cautious observation of Rorschach's fighting style, as Oshova was executed alive by Rorschach in an almost cruel manner. Deep in the void, the reassembled Tau Empire fleet officially launched a new round of attacks on the mining planet. Under the deliberate avoidance of the Dark Fury Guardians fleet, a large number of hovering vehicles and highly mobile battlesuit squads were airdropped onto the dust-filled surface. In order to reduce the Astartes, casualties and pressure, Rorschach, who was at the front line, also obtained the support of an Imperial Guard armored division from Cadia after successfully gaining partial recognition from the War Council. After a large number of Imperial vehicles also entered the battlefield, the war gradually entered a state of attrition. Inside the dust storm, Tetra-hovering transports carrying Pathfinder teams and White Scars hoverbikes sped wildly across the surface, the losers to be swallowed by the dust. On another flat desert plain, Leman Russ tanks slowly advancing were engaged in the ultimate showdown between heavy vehicles with Tau Empire Hammerhead hover tanks. Even in the dimly lit sky where the dust was constantly flying, a large number of agile Razorshark strike fighters were engaged in extremely fierce dogfights with Thunderhawk gunship squadrons. However, even as the intensity of the war on the entire mining planet continued to escalate, Commander Shadowsoon, whom Rorschach and the Dark Fury Guardians were most looking forward to, was nowhere to be seen. Not even the slightest bit of intelligence information was transmitted to the Dark Fury Guardians' intelligence network. Regarding this situation, Rorschach even suspected for a time that he had been too corn-like in his performance. Instead of successfully inspiring the other party's fighting spirit, he had caused them to develop a sense of fear. But judging from the Tau Empire's determined attack on the mining planet, Commander Shadowsoon had not shown any unusual signs. In the end, Rorschach, confirming that Shadowsoon had not landed on the mining planet, had no choice but to shift his attention from decapitating the opponent's commander to analyzing and commanding the overall battlefield situation. Soon after, with the heavy losses of combat personnel on various battlefields, all the Dark Fury Guardians used to ambush Shadowsoon were also redeployed to the battlefield to fight against those highly mobile battlesuit squads. However, not long after, Rorschach, who had just commanded a squad of Lamenter's Terminators to launch a teleportation attack, unexpectedly received an incredible piece of devastating information. Dark Fury Guardians Chapter Master, the Shadow Master Corvus Severax, was personally beheaded by Shadowsoon here. Facing a high-intensity, large-scale war, even superhuman Astartes are merely a small dot on a virtual terrain map, or a cold number in a series of casualty lists. They are no different from every mortal warrior responsible for filling the battle lines. Therefore, even the death of important figures at the level of Chapter Master is actually a common occurrence. But now, after repeatedly taking several deep breaths, the usually calm Roche could not help but unleash a low roar, like the eve of a volcanic eruption, at Kevon Strack, the third company captain who had just delivered the news of the death. Slowly driving his power armor forward, he stared at the other party and questioned loudly. Why would the Chapter Master of the Raven Guard be targeted for a decapitation strike by the enemy commander? What were their intelligence networks doing? What were the Terminator guards belonging to the Chapter Master himself doing? At this moment, the third company captain, his face full of anger and grief, barely restrained the emotional turmoil in his heart. He explained everything to the angry Primarch in detail. It turned out that with the investment of a large number of combat forces from both sides, the situation on some battlefields lacking Astartes' support continued to deteriorate. In order to present real achievements in front of the Primarch, Chapter Master Severax personally led half a company of Raven Guard veterans into the battle. However, when he accidentally discovered a white figure wearing an XV-22 stealth battlesuit commander on a battlefield, Chapter Master Severax immediately determined that it must be the Tau Empire commander, Shadowsoon. Subsequently, he quickly led the Raven Guard in a continuous series of assaults and interceptions against the other party. Even after several failures, disregarding the dissuasion of the Terminator bodyguard, he chose to venture alone deep into enemy-controlled territory, just to decapitate Shadowsoon. Unfortunately, just as Chapter Master Severax successfully beheaded Shadowsoon, another tall figure wearing an XV-95 Ghostkeel battlesuit suddenly emerged from stealth and used a deadly heavy-range weapon to ambush the Chapter Master, whose reaction speed had decreased, completely tearing the other party and his power armor in half. After listening to the third company captain's account, Roche quickly calmed the emotions in his heart. Commander Shadowsoon did come to this mining planet as expected, and did launch a decapitation retaliation against the Imperium of Man. However, the ultimate target chosen was not the Primarch, as everyone thought, but a more junior important figure. In fact, Roche and others had also speculated about similar situations. But even Roche himself always believed that, based on his level of hatred for beheading Ethereal Anova and Oshova, Shadowsoon would only focus the decapitation target on him. But the current situation shows the other party never intended to meet him from the beginning. Instead, they chose to weaken the morale of the Imperium of Man as much as possible, thereby gradually expanding the gains of the entire battlefield. Perhaps in Shadowsoon's view, narrow-minded hatred is far less important than winning a battle for the race. And even the death of Ethereal Anova is a measurable war cost. Thinking of this, Roche, whose brows were involuntarily furrowed, suddenly relaxed his entire brow. He slightly turned his head and stared at third company Captain Strack, whose expression was tense, and said, "From now on, immediately order the Cadian armored units to feign defeat and retreat, and evacuate them from the mining planet as soon as possible. At the same time, let the Raven Guard and White Scar's battle brothers launch a retaliatory raid, and pretend to be defeated, giving the entire battlefield to the Tau Empire." "Primarch, what are you planning?" At this moment, Captain Strack, who heard the Primarch's order, couldn't help but widen his eyes. He stared at the Primarch in front of him and asked subconsciously, "Since the Tau Empire wants this mining planet so much, then give it to them, but do you think an exploited mining planet is important to the Imperium of Man?" Rather than playing a game of hide-and-seek with Shadowsoon on the surface, or even wasting the lives of more battle brothers, I plan to directly show my hand and flip the table. I'm not going to play with them anymore. Rorschach, whose expression gradually became cold, drove his power armor and turned to walk towards the rear. At the same time, the Primarch's cold order was still clearly transmitted to the ears of the third company captain. Go notify the mixed fleet above the orbit to prepare vortex torpedoes. Let all the Tau forces on this planet, and even Shadowsoon herself, be buried with Chapter Master Severax. Soon after, with the retreat of the Cadian armored units and all the Astartes, the positions on the entire mining planet were successfully occupied by the aggressive Tau Empire forces. And the Raven Guard fleet, which was entangled with many Tau Empire fleets, and the White Scars fleet that secretly returned to the battlefield, quickly reversed their attack direction after all the retreating troops successfully entered the deck, and launched vortex torpedoes towards the mining planet not far away, in an instant, accompanied by a dazzling light visible even in the void orbit. An extremely terrifying explosion and continuous shockwaves swept rapidly across the surface of the entire planet. In a short period of time, even the sandstorms that had never stopped were completely submerged by the endless terrifying high temperatures. The entire planet's continental plates were constantly shaking, and then quickly cracked and collapsed. Even the planetary fortress, which was enough to withstand a large number of enemy bombings, was lifted into a fiery red and terrifying sky. Soon after, the explosion shockwave that swept across the entire planet seemed to trigger a chain reaction. A large number of minerals were also accidentally stimulated into a power source that completely disintegrated the planet's crust. And with pieces of broken crust gradually collapsing and drifting towards the void, the Raven Guard and White Scars fleets, as the culprits of the destruction, quickly disengaged from the battlefield covered with warships and planetary wreckage under the frantic siege of a large number of Tau Empire fleets and sailed away into the depths of the void. The destruction of the mining planet not only wiped out Commander Shadowsoon and a large number of Tau Empire ground forces, it also seemed to temporarily end the Tau Empire's war of expansion. However, as the direct leader who issued the extermination order, Rorschach is now completely a special object of continuous accountability and immediate review by the War Council of this sector. Even throughout the entire sector, all the Inquisitors were alerted and quickly boarded ships and rushed to Damocles Gulf. And the Raven Guard, who had just lost a chapter master, were naturally very dissatisfied with the attitude of the Inquisition and even the War Council towards the Primarch. If Rorschach hadn't intervened slightly, a fierce conflict between the Inquisition and the first founding chapter would have been inevitable. In fact, in the eyes of the Inquisition and the War Council, the loss of a mineral-rich planet in exchange for the temporary end of the Tau Empire's war of expansion was actually a very worthwhile deal. But once the external threat disappeared, those who were nominally maintaining the laws of the Imperium were even more concerned about the special privileges of the Astartes chapters and Primarchs that superseded the rules. Although these old fellows had vaguely judged from Leman Russ's personal record of beheading that he might really be a Gene Sire who had not yet returned. However, as long as Terra did not issue a formal order to grant Leman Russ an important position from the Imperial government, they could pretend to know nothing. Even though these ostriches in their hearts also understood, if the Primarch really gained power in the future, everyone might not have a good end, but they still chose to make things difficult for the Primarch. However, Leman Russ, who was about to leave the battlefield, did not have much thought to rectify the Imperial bureaucrats in this star sector. In the future, Lord Regent Guilliman will naturally come to personally discipline them. Moreover, the most important thing for the Raven Guard chapter at the moment is to elect the next chapter master. According to the arrangement of the previous chapter master, Corvus Corax, before his death, Shadow Captain Shrike of the Third Company will take over as chapter master. After Leman Russ personally had a detailed meeting with the other party, he began to summon the entire Raven Guard chapter, as well as White Scar's Third Company Captain Corsaro Khan and others to attend the chapter master's succession ceremony. Even Leman Russ, in order to discuss the local Imperial bureaucrats. He also specially invited an Inquisitor who had a good relationship with the Raven Guard to attend the ceremony. Soon after, inside an ancient hall located inside a battle barge, around the huge statue of the Raven Lord Corax, and under the personal witness of Primarch Leman Russ, Kayvon Shrike became the new Shadowmaster of the Raven Guard chapter, that is, the chapter master of the Raven Guard. In the following period of time, Lehman Russ also informed Chapter Master Shrike of the purpose of his visit. He needed to take a group of people from the Raven Guard to participate in more cruel battles in the future timeline. And after Chapter Master Shrike restrained his desire to fight alongside the Primarch for a long time, he immediately transferred half of the Raven Guard veterans from the 1st and 2nd companies to form an extra establishment veteran company of about 50 people. And drew more people from the reserve companies 7th and 8th, dividing a total of 150 people, including 2 company champions and 2 dreadnoughts. For the Raven Guard, who follow the Codex Astartes and have less than 1,000 people, these 200 people are all the Astartes they can currently bring out for Lehman Russ to take away. In this regard, after thinking for a while, Lehman Russ also deliberately issued a secret order to Chapter Master Shrike. That is, from this moment on, the Raven Guard can no longer follow the Codex Astartes, and they are allowed to expand the number of chapter members as much as possible when resources are sufficient. If they can completely restore the number of the Legion period, then the more the better. In addition, Lehman Russ also added a portion of the recovered gene seed stored inside the Raven Guard fleet, as well as the equipment and data for strengthening surgery, to the list of items to be taken away. And on the day before Lehman Russ was about to leave, Corsaro Khan of the White Scars also came to meet the Primarch, and handed over a battle squad composed of a Stormseer from the 3rd Company, a company champion, and 3 veterans to Lehman Russ. Lehman Russ accepted all comers, and also very much welcomed the Battle Brothers of the White Scars to go with him to the future to see the more cruel battlefield situation. Buzzing. Along with the sudden low buzzing sound in the humid air, a series of warp portals that gradually tore open quickly appeared inside an ancient hall. In the next second, 200 Raven Guard pushed out of the warp portal one after another, heavily scattered on the surrounding metal floor. Immediately afterwards, the Black Templars, with only 18 people left, and the Lamenter's Honor Guard, with 20 people. In addition to the Stormseer squad from the White Scars, they also escorted a batch of gene seed and surgical equipment slowly out of the warp portal. And just as everyone curiously looked at the strange environment around them through their visors, Lehman Russ, wearing Starfire-patterned power armor, also slowly returned to the current timeline. This is your Raven Guard successor chapter, the Forgotten Ones, the Void Fleet of the Carcharodons chapter. Lehman Russ, who was quickly taking off his skull helmet above his head, said in a deep voice to the people around him. At the same time, a palm-sized throne gelt slowly fell into his palm. Dong dong dong. At this moment, along with a burst of footsteps from far to near, the tall figure of Chief Librarian Tiberos appeared at the entrance of the ancient hall. The other party first stared at the various Astartes in front of him with great emotion. Then he put his pair of dark eyes on Lehman Russ. Congratulations on the safe return of the Primarch, and congratulations on gaining the support of more Astartes. I think the various battles we face later will be slightly easier. Long time no see, Tiberos. Since you are here, then you will be responsible for entertaining these battle brothers. Most of them come from the Raven Guard, and their relationship with your Carcharodons is closer. This battle brother is a Stormseer from the White Scars chapter, and your Librarius may have more communication desires. In addition, first prepare some panacea and stasis fields for those 2 ancient warriors of the Raven Guard. Don't stuff people into ice cubes according to your Carcharodon's old methods. I remember that you seized a batch of important materials such as stasis fields before, right? By the way, temporarily settle that batch of gene seed and surgical equipment for me, I have other uses for it later. At this moment, Lehman Russ, who was re-driving his power armor, said with a calm expression to Chief Librarian Tiberos not far away. Tiberos just grinned slightly in the direction of the Primarch, revealing shark-like sharp teeth. Afterwards, his whole person immediately entered the role of a tour guide, and began to arrange everything for the many Astartes. And Lehman Russ, who stayed for a while, shook his head slightly. He left this place with great peace of mind and went to his private cabin. Soon after, Lehman Russ, who had rested for a while, wanted to find Chapter Master Tiberos. But he was told by the Carcharodons that the other party was leading half a company to carry out a medium-sized rescue mission. So, after thinking about it, Lehman Russ drove his power armor and turned to find the Astartes of the Black Templars. It is a bit wasteful for the Black Templars, who currently have only 18 people left, to have a strike cruiser. Although Lehman Russ can directly issue orders in the identity of the Primarch, but he still likes to respect the wishes of the Battle Brothers. However, Lehman Russ's words had just begun, and he hadn't even explained much. The chaplain brother of the Black Templars readily agreed. He said that he was willing to give the strike cruiser to the Raven Guard for use. However, their only request was to become the Primarch's Terminator Honor Guard and continue to fight to protect the sons of the God Emperor. In this regard, Lehman Russ naturally expressed his incomparable welcome. He immediately found the Techmarine of the Carcharodons to replace the Terminator Power Armor for the Black Templars. So, Lehman Russ's Terminator Honor Guard, which had suffered personnel losses, was re-expanded to 38 people. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. As more Astartes chapters came under Rogal's command, and as their numbers gradually increased, he began to entertain an idea. That was, without changing the chapter culture or anything else, to encompass the Carcharodons, the Lamenters, and the newly arrived Raven Guard within a larger, more easily commanded legion structure. If everything was ready, Rogal even intended to fully restore the Astartes to their legion-era numbers and quality. For example, to completely reorganize each chapter gathered under his banner into combat companies tailored to different battlefield situations. Of course, all of this was just Rogal's initial idea. Everything still needed to be discussed and explored with everyone before a decision could be made. After all, a chapter master suddenly being demoted to a company commander, even with an order from the Primarch, would raise some issues from a human perspective. Astartes were the Emperor's angels, genetically modified warriors, but fundamentally, they were still within the realm of humanity. Otherwise, the Horus Heresy wouldn't have seen so many Astartes who hadn't sided with Chaos joining in. Moreover, Rogal was currently far from Terra and the Emperor. He had long led the Carcharodons in the Far East region, existing outside the laws and regulations of the Imperium. But if he established the 22nd Legion in advance without obtaining permission from Lord Regent Guilliman or the High Lords of Terra, then, given the rigid and inflexible nature of the Imperium's administrative system, and other petty power struggles, even if he was a Primarch, more Astartes chapters would likely come looking for trouble. If Rogal didn't want to be besieged at the Shining Peak by a large number of Astartes chapters in the Astra Militarum, reenacting a larger-scale Badab war, he needed to accumulate resources extensively and bide his time. Within the Cold Void, hundreds of large and small void ships sailed quietly along the warp routes. With the Carcharodons' fleet spreading out to provide support, Rogal and the others were now very close to the edge of the Ultima Segmentum. At Chapter Master Tybero's suggestion, the entire Void fleet was currently heading to the nearest Forge world, Triplex Fal. The long, continuous battles and support operations had earned the Carcharodons chapter a considerable amount of blood tithe and grey tithe. However, the maintenance and repairs of a large number of void ships still required the strong support of the Forge world. Moreover, more of the grey tithe needed to be exchanged for essential supplies more suitable for the Astartes chapter's consumption and use. Soon after, sitting on the metal throne, Rogal, repeatedly reviewing the simulator's diplomacy page, was still preoccupied with the disappearance of Forge World Griffon IV. Although he didn't believe they would necessarily heed his advice and head to the resource-rich Ghoul stars to establish a new Forge World, he had never seen a Forge World simply disappear before. Subsequently, Rogal, after pondering for a moment, slowly stood up from the metal throne. He decided to take advantage of the lull in battles and the Void Fleet's journey to the Forge World to lead the two newly appointed company commanders and two company champions of the Raven Guard on a trip to their homeworld. Firstly, to obtain more supplies from their homeworld to replenish their resources. Secondly, to send the gene seed and surgical data equipment back to the Twins Isle base. Thus, having made up his mind, Rogal immediately summoned the two company commanders and champions of the Raven Guard, instructing them to escort that batch of gene seed and surgical equipment to the ancient halls. Twins Isle base, on the brightly lit circular plaza. Ukari, the Carcharodons' librarian stationed here long-term, completed his daily routine prayer to the statue of the Emperor. And after exchanging greetings with those familiar Tech Guard patrol squads, his tall frame slowly drove his power armor back to his post, beginning to consume the nutrient porridge prepared with ceramite powder and the protein bars that replenished his energy. The next second, Librarian Ukari, still with food in his mouth, vaguely saw a fleeting wisp of psychic flame light up in the direction of the Emperor's statue. Flustered, he immediately activated his power armor. He rushed to the center of the circular plaza and began to unleash his psychic powers. Chi chi chi, Accompanied by a large amount of frost spreading across the metal floor and the gradually chilling air, a slowly tearing spatial rift appeared out of thin air in front of Librarian Ukari. Dong dong dong. Immediately afterward, the towering Rogel, along with the Raven Guard Company commanders and champions escorting the Gene Seed, also revealed their figures. Good work, Ukari. Rogel, slowly removing his skull helmet, stared at Librarian Ukari and said softly. And as the spatial rift rapidly dissipated, Librarian Ukari, feeling the pressure suddenly decrease, smiled slightly and nodded heavily in Rogel's direction. Buzz buzz buzz. Just then, accompanied by a burst of crackling sound suddenly echoing in the air, and an azure blue square barrier slowly appearing in front of everyone, the Iron Man David, sitting in a large floating chair, quickly manifested as if printed out as a copy. Welcome home, my lord. Iron Man David, his eye sockets flashing with blue light, immediately stood up from the floating chair and said loudly to Rogel, the most conspicuous among the group. Long time no see, David, have your little toys gained new features? At this moment, Rogel, a faint smile appearing on the corner of his mouth, stared at the familiar Iron Man David and asked slowly. My lord, you're mistaken. This is the new type of teleportation technology, time platform, that Mr. Fantastic Reed and Mr. Doom are jointly developing. However, although it's called the time platform, time travel is still a pipe dream, it's just a beautiful metaphor. As soon as he finished speaking, Iron Man David, lightly jumping off the floating chair, slightly shook his metal head. He first stared at the Raven Guard Company commanders and champions following behind Rogel, then looked at the huge metal cabinet they were carrying. My lord, this is... Haven't Professor Connors and Dr. Banner been constantly complaining about not having fresh gene seed to study? This time, I've not only brought back gene seed but also a large amount of ancient equipment and data that can be used for enhancement surgery. I want to use the talented scientists of the homeworld to improve the success rate of Astartes surgery or, to some extent, modify it. Even if it can't be done, the homeworld will have gained the ability to create Astartes, which is also a good thing. At this moment, Rogel, narrowing his eyes, slowly said to the Iron Man David in front of him. However, before Iron Man David could reply, Rogel, slightly shifting his gaze, suddenly frowned. He quickly raised a vibranium palm, pointing a finger at the row of kill markings in front of the floating chair's armrest, and asked Iron Man David. David, what's going on here? Also, this black and red special symbol looks so familiar. As Rogel's voice fell, Iron Man David, his mechanical voice clearly filled with helplessness, slowly let out a sigh. My lord, have you heard of a supernatural disaster called the Deadpool Corps? If saying the First Legion had no secrets was a jest and a satire aimed at the terrifying Inner Circle members of the Dark Angels chapter. Then when the already unruly Deathwatch became the first Inner Circle member of the Dark Angels based on Earth. Treating poison with poison, as if he had achieved some kind of spiritual sublimation, he completely became a supernatural disaster that could not be dispelled from the Twin Islands base. Supernatural refers to the mysterious characteristic that even if Deathwatch's face is hit by a thermal melt or plasma washes the ground, he will not completely die. Disaster refers to him leading his Grand Master, the ancient machine spirit residing in the Power Fist. Plus a mechanical parrot that has defected to them, and a team of automated servo robots that have been contaminated, or evolved by Deathwatch's Inner Circle ideology, doing evil, in the entire base. Of course, if it were only so, then Iron Man David would have countless ways to deal with them, without even having to mobilize the Astartes. Including but not limited to directly packing Deathwatch himself into a box and sinking him into the sea, or using the space stone to throw him into a star or other ultimate tricks. Unfortunately, Iron Man David cannot do this. Besides the fact that the mischief of these guys only stays within the scope of pranks and has not caused any irreparable major accidents. One point is that Deathwatch actually had a vision of the Emperor when he was praying to the Emperor's statue. And Iron Man David, who came to track him down, happened to witness this scene with his own eyes. However, this is not the real reason why Iron Man David can tolerate Deathwatch's nonsense. In a series of events where the two sides fought wits and courage, Iron Man David finally discovered why Deathwatch was so annoying. That's because the other party may be the only, untouchable, discovered in the Earth world. Untouchables are an extremely rare type of mutant in the Warhammer universe. Their souls do not exist inside the warp, or rather, what is presented as just a dead black hole. That is to say, Untouchables are naturally immune to psychic powers, as well as troubles such as demon possession and chaos corruption, plus they can shield psychic fluctuations in a certain range, and can be said to be the best anti-psychic tool. As a result, Deathwatch, who possesses the untouchable physique and the Emperor's vision as double death exemption gold medals, reached a very tacit agreement with Iron Man David. That is, if some of Deathwatch's behaviors and words are really annoying and angering. Anyone can kill Deathwatch once. But at the same time, Deathwatch and his inner circle madman partners must be allowed to stay in the Twin Islands base to continue serving the Emperor. Although Deathwatch occasionally brings some laughable disasters to everyone, at least the stage of restoring the body after the other party's death can be quiet for a lot of time. Untouchable. At this moment, Lorgar, who was squinting, slightly widened his eyes. He stared at Iron Man David in front of him and said, "No wonder Deathwatch gives people such a bad first impression. I didn't even think of this. Perhaps the Emperor's vision is also because he has other uses. Well, if that's the case, then don't kill him in the future. Aren't Professor Connors and Dr. Banner lacking human bodies for live experiments? Then just catch Deathwatch specifically, which can be repeatedly used for surgical experiments without causing more waste. Moreover, doesn't he like to play the madman inner circle member of the Dark Angels? I will specifically look for the gene seed of the Dark Angels later to see if I can create a soulless Astartes. If it really succeeds, then our anti-psychic troops may really be called the Deathwatch Legion." As soon as the voice fell, Lorgar, staring at Iron Man David, slowly stepped onto the floating chair, driving the power armor. He waved his vibranium palm at the Raven Guard captain and the champions not far away, and then led everyone towards the outside of the circular square. And Chief Librarian Ukari, who had nothing to do, also slowly walked towards his own position. In the time that Lorgar was away, the Earth world can be said to have undergone earth-shaking changes. First of all, the large-scale ornithopter detection array for detecting and preventing alien Xenos invasions has been successfully launched into near-Earth orbit with the help of the Asian side. Currently, a series of equipment has also successfully entered the operating state. At the same time, because Lorgar deliberately left the Space Stone for everyone to study, Mr. Fantastic Reed, who joined the team as an advisor to the Terra Astartes Legion and the workaholic Doom, also used the Space Stone and Xenos technology to research new teleportation technology, the Time Platform. The birth of this teleportation technology not only greatly accelerated the flow of materials and personnel between the bases. The safety aspect is also much safer than the traditional Terminator teleportation beacon technology. At least it will not cause a large number of combat personnel losses due to teleportation failure. However, it is still in the trial stage and needs to be adjusted more carefully. However, according to Iron Man David, when Lorgar leaves Earth, he can take a prototype device to try it out to see if the time platform can adapt to the physical laws of the Warhammer universe. In addition, Comrade Tony of the Ordo Hereticus Grand Master also launched the preliminary project of the planetary defense plan with the help of Redditus. Tens of thousands of automated servo robots were thrown by them to the moon through the Space Stone, and they are taking the first step in establishing a lunar base. Tony even used the Cobra-class destroyer docked in near-Earth orbit to place a large space station in near-Earth orbit as a secret stronghold to assist the Astartes in orbital drops or hero gatherings. Stark Watchtower is the official name Tony gave to this space station. Currently, except for a small team of Astartes stationed there for a long time, it has not been activated yet. Soon after, the group who had settled the gene seed walked towards the base hall. And Iron Man David also told Lorgar an interesting story. That is, the city of New York, which has experienced the Xenos invasion, is currently conducting a series of wrangling lawsuits with the official forces of the Americas under the protests and demonstrations of countless people. The focus of their protests is not only because the official forces were always inactive when the invasion occurred. In the end, it was the superheroes and the Terra Astartes Legion, who were once considered terrorists, who won the war. The stupid behavior of the official forces in failing to send a large number of rescue teams after the end of the invasion also completely chilled the hearts of the New York people. Nowadays, nearly 70% of the people basically agree that New York City needs to completely separate its security and public order powers and hand them over to heroes or the Terra Astartes Legion. Some more radical people even think that they should change the name of the city and break with the past New York. And in the voting options for many city names, the ancient word, Gotham, has become the leading first place. Once the official forces make concessions due to public grievances, then the former New York City may be renamed Gotham City. Inside the brightly lit base hall, 4 Raven Guard company captains and a champion stood like metal statues in the shadows, performing basic guard duties for the Primarch. Even when Iron Man David wanted them to rest, the Astartes refused and even ignored him. It wasn't until Rorschach, sitting at the metal round table, spoke that the loyal Raven Guard, driven by their power armor, followed the guiding automatic servo robots out of the base hall. Subsequently, Iron Man David, with blue light flashing in his eye sockets, began to report on other aspects to Rorschach, who was eating and casually reviewing numerous documents. As the saying goes, where there is light, there is shadow. Not everything is developing for the better. In fact, the occurrence of bad things is a constant state. The invasion of alien Xenos. In reality, it has plunged the world's population into a state of anxiety as disaster looms. Many people have begun to buy large quantities of supplies and look for suitable hiding places within their means. And these are still a series of choices made by those with middle-class incomes or above, or those with rational minds. As for those bottom-level people who live hand-to-mouth, who can barely feed themselves, or who even have a criminal record, the world today seems to have become a carnival party before the end of the world. Taking Europe and Oceania, which Rorschach can currently control, as an example, the number of crimes in various places has shown an exponential increase. And the probability of the occurrence of malignant events that can cause anger is, to some extent, far beyond Iron Man David's expectations. Even those superheroes who have joined the Vengeance Inquisition, as well as some wild heroes, have joined the local public security rectification operation, and the execution methods have become increasingly fierce. However, correspondingly, the confrontational emotions between the public and the system, as well as the long-term maintenance of a high-pressure mentality, have also increased the success rate of the public triggering superpowers. This can be judged based on the successive deaths and disappearances of several people in the Lamenters chapter. Faced with all kinds of strange superpowers, even Astartes sometimes capsize in the gutter. Currently, Astartes alone has more than a company of people with a history of violent crimes who have been made into heavy combat servitors because of the rarity of their superpowers, not to mention those criminals who were executed on the spot by the Astartes. Therefore, the 2 sky motherships personally commanded by Captain Baki and Deputy Jessica have been wandering in the European region for a long time, carrying the Intelligence Control Legion, in order to prevent large-scale riots from occurring and causing irreparable resource losses. At this moment, Rorschach, who was quietly listening to Iron Man David's words, suddenly stopped chewing. He raised his hand, picked up a page of document on the metal table, turned his head and asked Iron Man David softly, "David, what is the Inquisitor Project?" Hearing Rorschach's question, Iron Man David shook his metal head slightly. The blue light in his eye sockets flickered as he said to Rorschach, "My lord, you may not have noticed, this is actually a follow-up to the Mobile Hive City project. You don't need to look for the documents, let me explain. By studying various local historical documents and video materials, I found that if we want to solve the problems we are currently facing, we must give the countless restless people a sense of security, as well as a certain degree of livelihood security. Suppression and even killing alone cannot fundamentally solve the problem. And a sentence of complaint that Astartes occasionally uttered when he met me gave me some inspiration. He was complaining that these local superpowered criminals are more difficult to manage than the people in the Hive City, and it was this sentence that gave me a solution. If we exclude the natural bad seeds among those people, we will find why the local people launch parades and riots from time to time. That is because they do not have the assets and abilities like the rich to resist the current drastically changing world situation. And what we can do is to give them a stable residence and a food ration that will not starve them to death, and the modular mobile hive city is enough to solve 80% of the problem. According to the idea that Astartes later gave, each mobile hive city is actually a part of a super large titan with mobile capabilities, and can even be combined and divided with each other. If more modular blueprints can be designed in advance, large-scale long-range weapons can even be installed on it, making these mobile hive cities our last trump card. Of course, unless the entire Terra is completely lost, the basic functions of these mobile hive cities are limited to ensuring the people's livelihood. At this moment, Rorschach, hearing Iron Man David's words, once again forgot to chew. Even as a Primarch, he had to give a thumbs up to the crazy ideas of Iron Man David and Astartes. Okay, Let's assume everything goes smoothly and we can completely quell the resistance of the local people, then how do you plan to manage them? Although I don't care about the consumption of resources, and in the future, with the increase in the number of ships and the sharing of space technology, we can also carry out space colonization to obtain more resources, but before that, the accumulated consumption of materials is not a small number for us. Rorschach swallowed the last mouthful of food in his mouth. He focused his attention completely on Iron Man David's skull head and said to him slowly, "My lord, we are not philanthropists who can provide free supplies to the old, weak, sick, and disabled, but for young and middle-aged people, their choices are actually not many. Either enter the mobile hive city and become a worker, stably obtaining certain supplies, or stay in the increasingly chaotic outside city until they starve to death or die from criminal activities. Currently, in order to stabilize the situation, we can even abandon the more convenient and faster automatic servo robot clusters, and let trained workers become a member of the production line. Each mobile hive city will get 1 to several production lines according to the number of people, and the production lines can be used to manufacture various parts on the ships, or other vehicle equipment. Of course, for safety reasons, the parts produced in the same area cannot be assembled, but are completely dispersed, and finally the most important assembly steps are carried out by automatic servo robots. At this moment, Iron Man David, with blue light flashing in his eye sockets, said to Rorschach from shallow to deep. And Rorschach, who lowered his head and pondered slightly, picked up the document printed with the Inquisitor project again, signaling Iron Man David to continue explaining. Now that we have temporarily solved the problem of livelihood security, we need to bring a sense of security to the people. The Astartes patrols can indeed play a considerable role, and mortal warriors may also be able to, but not all Astartes are lamenters, and they cannot stay in a fixed place for a long time, and they all need to participate in battles that may occur. Then an idol who is both a judge, a jury, and an executioner is the most direct manifestation of the people's sense of security. Currently, I already have an almost perfect Inquisitor candidate, a hard bone who hates evil like an enemy, that is the middle-aged man named Punisher. Frank Castle, also known as the Punisher. He once launched an assassination attempt against Rogers due to Hydra's manipulations. However, he received a thorough lesson from the Astartes under Rourke's command. Since then, he has been imprisoned at the Gemini Island base. According to Iron Man David, he attempted to brainwash him approximately 3 times. But Frank resisted it with willpower and conviction far exceeding that of an ordinary Astartes. And he would successfully recover his lost memories every so often. It was precisely because of this that Iron Man David, after the Inquisitor program was freshly launched, immediately added him to the initial Inquisitor evaluation range. In fact, Frank now, through the vast amount of information and documents provided by Iron Man David, thoroughly understood how foolish his assassination attempt had been. However, facing an ordinary human who could withstand the brainwashing program with willpower, Iron Man David would never let him leave easily, let alone without Rourke's permission. Soon after, inside a spacious cell beneath Gemini Island, Rourke, sitting on a floating chair, gazed with interest at the middle-aged man before him, whose expression seemed more peaceful, but whose eyes still flickered with a bright light. When I learned from David that you could withstand several brainwashing programs with willpower, I was genuinely shocked. You even reminded me of a legendary figure from our place, a man named Sly Marbo. He was also one of my mentors. Frank, I'm very curious, what exactly supported you in enduring the brainwashing program, and even desperately recovering your lost memories? At this moment, hearing Rourke's question, Frank, sitting cross-legged on the metal floor, raised a strong arm covered in fingernail marks forward. With a calm expression, he hesitated slightly, then spoke faintly in Rourke's direction. Probably my unfortunately deceased wife, daughter, and son. The most cruel thing in this heartless world is not death, but forgetting. If I cannot withstand the brainwashing program, then the completely scrambled brain will gradually lose those memories engraved in the depths of my soul. I dare not, and I am unwilling to completely strip those brief, beautiful moments from my mind. If even I forget their existence, then they will truly disappear from this cold and ruthless world. Hearing Frank's words, Rourke, with a slightly complicated expression, shook his head slightly. He took a deep breath and said, "Then, Frank, how do you view us now?" Rourke's words caused a meaningful smile to appear on Frank's calm expression. He first closed his eyes and remained silent for a while, then opened his eyes and said, "In fact, After Mr. David performed several brainwashing programs on me without success, he had already changed his strategy towards me. The original intention of establishing your Terra-Stellar Legion, and the various complex situations you are facing now, Mr. David has basically let me know a part of it, without involving core secrets. I have personally seen your images of fighting against supernatural demons, and I have also seen the cruel methods of those metal giants called Astartes when dealing with criminals. This is something I especially like. I am not a supporter of free will, and after fighting criminals for so many years, I believe that a rational and powerful order is the only way to eliminate or reduce crime. To be honest, staying in the cage for so long is entirely my own fault, because in the past I almost mistakenly killed a truly good person because of Hydra's lies, and the news of Hydra's destruction also made me feel a bit of comfort. However, one thing I am still very puzzled about is that, judging from the combat power you have shown, you don't seem to lack an ordinary person like me. Why would you, as the leader of the Legion, come to see me in person? At this moment, hearing the question in Frank's words, Rourke raised his eyebrows slightly and said softly, "Frank, the whole world is undergoing drastic changes every minute and every second. The Earth today is no longer the beautiful homeland you remember, which was basically peaceful, half good and half bad. Countless evils are constantly brewing in places that you and I can hardly detect, waiting for the day to break ground. Perhaps you once faced criminals in a block, or even a city, but now, these criminals are rampant from a country or even a landmass. The hearts of countless people are undergoing drastic turmoil due to the influence of external things, and you are currently the most suitable to become an idol of a conceptual type, a materialized symbol of judging evil. You might as well expand your field of vision further, from focusing on mere criminals to the evil deeds themselves. Perhaps you will have some different views on this." As soon as Rourke's words fell, Frank, whose face showed a thoughtful expression, frowned slightly. He stared at Rourke, who was sitting on the floating chair, and asked, or rather, what exactly do you want me to do?" "Frank, of course it is to do what you are good at, eliminate the evil in this world, and become a mortal guardian in the hearts of countless people. If you are willing, you can even tell everyone about your life experience, so that countless people can help you remember, and even commemorate your deceased family. Frank Castle, are you willing to become an Inquisitor? A nemesis of evil who combines the roles of judge, jury, and even executioner?" At this moment, facing Rourke's increasingly solemn words, Frank, taking a deep breath, seemed to be in a state of contemplation. After a long time, his entire aura rapidly changed from peaceful to sharply revealing. "If everything is really as simple as you said, then I am naturally willing to become an Inquisitor. In fact, after staying here for so long, I still miss the wails of those criminals to some extent." In the next second, Frank's words had just echoed in the surrounding air. Rourke, sitting on the floating chair, drove the golden power armor to slowly rise. Even the pair of huge vibranium wings located behind the power backpack also constantly unfolded towards the surroundings with his rapidly rising mood. "Welcome to my team, Frank Castle, or rather, Inquisitor." Having experienced imprisonment and completely turned over a new leaf, Frank became an initial judge under the witness of Rorschach. But all of this is just the beginning. Although Frank is hailed as a top expert within the human range, proficient in various weapons and equipment, he is still not qualified enough to face the current superhumans. Therefore, he not only needs to inject the super soldier serum, but also needs a set of judge power armor tailored for him. More importantly, he needs a series of legal knowledge to cram. Following the method of action of an eye for an eye and blood for blood is simple and effective. But it can only play a temporary role, and cannot achieve long-term stability. Of course, this is just a nominal constraint on the judges, and the specific actions still need to be adapted to local conditions by the judges. However, when Iron Man David moved books of imperial law and local human legal books, each half a foot thick, in front of Frank, even Frank, who was now indifferent to emotions, couldn't help but widen his eyes, revealing a dumbfounded expression. Even if Frank faced hundreds or thousands of deadly bandits alone, he wouldn't be so shocked. And when Iron Man David told him that this was actually just the table of contents, Frank even subconsciously thought about whether he should go back to prison. In the end, Rorschach came forward to stop Iron Man David's half-joking behavior. A series of legal materials will be gathered and screened by Iron Man David to compile a set of legal regulations suitable for the local area. All of them are instilled into the vast storage of the shipboard spirit Cortana. The judge's power armor will be connected to the shipboard spirit Cortana to a certain extent. In this way, one is to facilitate the shipboard spirit Cortana to monitor the movements of each judge, so as not to let them act arbitrarily like the Imperial judges. Rorschach can trust Frank's style and character. But the judges recruited later may not be like this, so this can be regarded as an insurance mechanism. Secondly, it also greatly reduces the workload of the judges. They only need to face various vicious criminals and even complex cases full of mysteries, and no longer need to face book documents or reports like heavenly books. Soon after, Frank, who successfully completed the super soldier serum injection, followed 2 company champions from the Raven Guard under Rorschach's instructions. A series of enhanced training activities began, and in order to gradually grow this initial judge, Rorschach even transferred heavy combat servitors with various superpowers from Lorger to allow Frank to adapt to the experience of fighting against superhumans in advance. As time passed, Rorschach went to the Antarctic airport and successfully extracted the second local spacecraft, the Sword-class frigate, from the simulator. Currently, Mr. Fantastic Reed and Doom himself are on the Chitauri mothership in lunar orbit, studying the opponent's faster-than-light engine. Therefore, Rorschach simply didn't bother them if there was nothing important. After all, if this level of research goes smoothly, perhaps the human empire in the Warhammer universe will also receive certain benefits. Although Rorschach believes that if the local world's faster-than-light engine can play a role in the Warhammer universe, it will inevitably be a bloody storm that stretches across most of the Empire's territory. But if it can solve some of the problems that plague the human empire, such as warp travel and warp communication, then even if the human empire maintains its current half-dead state, it will be considered to have increased a lot of hope. Just as Rorschach, who had returned to the base, wanted to take advantage of the rare rest time. When he was planning to simulate the enhancement surgery, Iron Man David, in a hurry, found him again. My lord, Natasha, who is lurking in the Slavs' old home, the Soviet Union, has sent back some very important intelligence information. At this moment, Iron Man David, with blue light flashing in his eyes, said to Rorschach, who was pinching a thrown gelt in his hand. Rorschach, with a blank expression, took a deep breath. He put away the thrown gelt in his vibranium palm and stared at Iron Man David in front of him and asked, "Then tell me, Natasha hasn't sent back any intelligence information for a long time. My lord, before that, as a human who grew up locally, have you heard of mutants?" Iron Man David's words made Rorschach slightly stunned. He narrowed his eyes and pondered for a moment. The expression on his face gradually became serious. Of course he knew what mutants were. But aside from those things that Rorschach already knew, he couldn't find even a trace of impression in his other memories, which proved that similar words had never appeared in the local world. "David, what exactly do you want to tell me?" Rorschach took another deep breath and asked Iron Man David in front of him softly. "My lord, Natasha successfully changed her identity and returned to the main country of the Slavs by rescuing one of her former family members, Alexei Shostakov, known as the Red Guardian, or the Soviet captain. After a long period of lurking, she accidentally discovered a shocking secret that has lasted for decades. From the various intelligence materials collected by our intelligence agency, Assassin, we know that the Soviet Union has a large number of superhuman special forces. Natasha originally thought that this was just a normal human experiment plan launched by the 5 permanent members of the United Nations, just like the American official super soldier program. It's just that the other party's human experiment plan has achieved remarkable results, so they have a structured superhuman unit. But later, the more Natasha collected various information, the more she realized that those superhumans were not created the day after tomorrow, but were born that way. They believe that they are a branch of human evolution, so they call themselves mutants. However, if it's just mutants, then we don't have anything to be surprised about. After all, there are all kinds of mutants in our old home. As long as the other party stands on the side of humans, we can completely pretend not to know about them. Even originally, I didn't put this matter at the top of the to-do list, but recently our intelligence agents have respectively delved into all the data libraries of S.H.I.E.L.D. and found some ancient documents that the American officials have completely sealed, which made me just combine and reconstruct a series of things. According to my speculation and confirmed timeline, mutants began to appear sporadically in the local world from the 1960s, but due to the persecution and fear of mutants by ordinary people, the Americas, where the largest number of mutants lived, took the lead in launching a secret plan to exterminate mutants. By the mid-1980s, The former SHIELD and official forces used food and air to spread a certain vaccine or virus that inhibited mutant genes, artificially eliminating the number of mutants to near extinction. I believe that during this period, there must have been more than one large-scale war between humans and mutants. But then the development of everything seemed to have reversed. According to top-secret information found by Natasha, one of the two leaders of the mutant group, a powerful mutant who is said to be able to control the minds of all humans, completely deleted the concept of mutants and all memories from the depths of the minds of people all over the world for the continuation of the race. Only a small amount of remaining information can be found in some paper documents and outdated CDs. Perhaps in order to avoid subsequent persecution from official forces, or simply tired of those stupid people, the remaining mutants all over the world used their superpowers to join the Soviet Union and successfully saved the Soviet Union from disintegration in the 1990s, completely becoming the upper echelons of the entire country. If there are no accidents, the current Soviet regime is nominally one of the important members of the United Nations Security Council, but secretly, it has long been a powerful country that only belongs to mutants. At this moment, Iron Man David's words caused Luo Sha to gradually fall into a state of contemplation. No wonder he could even establish diplomatic relations with Asia. Yet he never really understood the Soviet Union, which spanned the Eurasian continent. It turned out that the root of everything was because the other party was essentially a country composed of mutants. However, Luo Sha had no prejudice against the mutant side, as long as those guys didn't shout about destroying the world or humanity every day. He could completely tolerate their existence. Even in Luo Sha's view, if Terra, his home planet, encountered some difficult problems in the future, perhaps these mutants who chose to live in seclusion would become a special and vital force. However, just as Luo Sha wanted to have some detailed discussions with Iron Man David about this. Woo woo woo. A piercing alarm suddenly cut through the barriers of air and metal walls, quickly reaching Luo Sha's ears. And just as Luo Sha frowned slightly and drove his power armor to stand up abruptly, Iron Man David, with blue light flashing in his eyes, immediately received a large amount of important information sent to it from the outside world. My lord, this is data information transmitted back from the Stark Observatory Tower. As for the alarm, it was originally a warning device used to prevent chaos invasion or large-scale catastrophic events. Just a few hours ago, the radiation dose in the Chernobyl region of the Soviet Union gradually rose far beyond normal levels. If it continues to brew at the current rate, I am afraid that our land in Europe and a large number of people will suffer irreparable major losses. In addition, if I remember correctly, Natasha seemed to be active in this area before because of the transfer of her disguised identity, but now it is impossible to get in touch with her. Iron Man David's words had just fallen. Luo Sha, whose expression gradually became serious, said without hesitation. David, immediately have Tony, in his official capacity as the Vengeance Inquisition, launch a formal inquiry to their embassy. At the same time, contact Zheng Xian, the director of SHIELD, and see if he has any news obtained through special channels. In addition, prepare the teleportation technology, time platform. I plan to lead the Raven Guard to sneak into this strange mutant country to take a look. Oh, yes, let Dr. Banner come with me as well. After all, he should be the most skilled in dealing with radiation-related issues. As you command, my lord. At this moment, Iron Man David, with blue light flashing in his eyes, said without any hesitation. Ah, a strong man with silver skin all over his body suddenly opened his silver-white eyes. With the creaking and twisting sound from the old army bed beneath him, the other party slowly propped up his extremely heavy silver metal body. Oh, Rasputin, did you dream of your dead sister again, and this time, why did you dream that she was fighting alone against a large number of rotten and smelly demons? Hee, maybe my eccentric sister didn't go to heaven, but went to hell. At this moment, the steel man who was muttering to himself casually picked up a thick diary from under his pillow. He carefully picked up a pen clipped inside. Then, he recorded his strange dream bit by bit, judging from the number of pages consumed in the diary and its age. Obviously, the other party's state has lasted for quite some time. A few minutes later, the tall man with steel-like skin slowly left the long-suffering army bed. He casually grabbed a set of green military uniforms from the end of the bed and put them on. Then, shaking his sturdy metal body, which was as tall as 2 meters, he walked out of the room without looking back. Comrade Rasputin, good morning. At this moment, A woman with short red hair and a green skirt-like military uniform quickly revealed her curvaceous and agile figure, directly blocking the tall man's path. "Good morning, Comrade Natalia. It's past 7 in the morning now. We have entered the time belonging to the country. I still hope you call me Colossus, Major," the tall man named Colossus said indifferently to the outstanding female soldier in front of him. "Major Colossus, you don't think I came to find you so early because I admire you or like you, do you?" However, the red-haired female soldier couldn't help but roll her eyes and subconsciously smiled. She reached out and took out a document from under her armpit and handed it to Colossus. "This is an order from General Logan. He still orders you to report to him in Red Square within 3 days. How many times is this month?" I said. "His transfer order has not been approved by the State Duma. If General Logan sends another transfer order, you can ask him to find the elders of the clan. My only task is to protect the important property of our country and guard the Chernobyl nuclear power plant." At this moment, Colossus, with a slight frown, reached out and took the document. He crumpled the entire document into a ball of waste paper with his metal fingers as if he were treating it like toilet paper. "Major Colossus, although I am a new recruit who has just arrived, even I, who do clerical work, can clearly see that there are too many troops guarding the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, right? Is there any secret here that is far beyond our understanding?" The red-haired female soldier with an exaggerated expression deliberately asked Major Colossus in a mysterious tone. Colossus, with a slight frown, wanted to remind the other party to pay attention to the confidentiality regulations. But he thought about it, the other party was just a clerical female soldier who had just been transferred here. So, Major Colossus took a deep breath and said to the red-haired female soldier with a solemn expression, "Comrade Natalia, this is my personal warning to you. Do not enter any part of the nuclear power plant after 8 o'clock in the evening. If you hear an alarm or an evacuation broadcast, you need to find an escape route to the outside as soon as possible. If there is nothing you can do, the entire nuclear power plant is full of sealed rooms with thick hatches. You need to completely lock yourself inside. The air and supplies inside can support you for about 24 hours, and our comrades will definitely rescue you within this time." At this moment, Major Colossus's serious words made the obvious smile on the red-haired female soldier's face completely disappear. Her eyes seemed to flicker. The expression on her face immediately revealed a hint of shallow and easy-to-understand fear. "Major Colossus, is Chernobyl not just a simple nuclear power plant? Why is everything you said so terrifying? I regret being transferred here. Hehe, Comrade Natalia, this is a test for you from the country and the elders. You need to continue to persevere. Moreover, I'm not bragging to you, since I became the highest officer in the Chernobyl area, there has never been a safety accident here." However, at this moment, Major Colossus's words had not completely dissipated in the air. Rumble, along with a series of shocks and roars transmitted from deep underground. Red lights symbolizing extreme danger instantly shone on the stiff-faced Major Colossus and the red-haired female soldier whose expression suddenly turned cold. Could it be an earthquake? Suka Bliat. Something happened to those things imprisoned below. Buzz buzz buzz, accompanied by a sustained, low-pitched buzzing and vibration. A square barrier of azure blue suddenly appeared in the air. Then the entire barrier immediately rose from low to high, as if a printer was transporting several tall figures onto the ground from thin air. Oh, Doom and Reed's teleportation technology is indeed very stable. I originally had some doubts about it, but it seems that my lack of knowledge reserves led to prejudice. At this moment, a thin figure, shrouded from head to toe in heavy protective clothing, said in a muffled voice to Luo Sha and the others beside him. Behind him and in the palms of his hands, various sizes of measuring instruments began to emit a continuous buzzing sound as they operated. Luo Sha, can I take off this protective suit now? Honestly, if I continue to wear it, I'm afraid the Hulk will come out and cause trouble for me again, and mere nuclear radiation is not a big problem for me. At this moment, Dr. Banner, moving slowly, shook his heavy protective suit. He turned his head and said to Luo Sha, whose skull helmet was faintly glowing. Luo Sha first waved his hand. Let the 2 Raven Guard champions, who had just changed into vibranium power armor, begin to guard the surrounding environment. He then lowered his head to look down at Dr. Banner and said in a low voice, "Dr. Banner, after you finish the scientific research measurements, you can leave directly via teleportation. Although I know the Hulk is very powerful, we still need to be more cautious when facing all kinds of mutants. Besides, this is just a reconnaissance mission, we are not here for an invasion battle. However, Luo Sha's words had just fallen. Pong pong pong, accompanied by a low roar and the ear-splitting sound of the heavy protective suit being torn apart. A green giant over 3 meters tall suddenly appeared beside Luo Sha in the blink of an eye. Hulk, fearless. The Hulk, with a stubborn expression, turned his head and looked at Luo Sha's skull helmet, and he grinned, saying each word distinctly. The next second, it seemed that the Professor Hulk's personality had successfully appeased the angry Hulk. The Professor, whose size had obviously shrunk by a circle, reappeared. He said to Luo Sha with a helpless expression, "Mr. Luo Sha, you'd better not say bad things about us Hulk in front of Dr. Banner. For the peaceful coexistence between each personality, our various senses are now shared, and the childish Hulk simply can't distinguish the metaphors, rhetorical questions, or hints in our adult language." At this moment, the words of Professor Hulk caused Luo Sha to fall into silence for a moment. He seemed to take a deep breath inside the skull helmet and said in a deep voice, "Okay, my fault, Professor, how are your instruments detecting?" Regarding Luo Sha's behavior of changing the subject, Professor Hulk smiled gently. Still towering, he bent down and picked up the fallen instrument from the ground. However, as time went on, the expression on Professor Hulk's face became more and more serious. "Mr. Luo Sha, this is not ordinary nuclear leak radiation. To be precise, nuclear radiation only accounts for a small part of it, and the rest is more of gamma radiation, which I am most familiar with. Moreover, if I'm not mistaken, these gamma rays with a lot of basic activity seem to be spreading from a huge living substance. But I've only encountered similar situations on myself in the past." At this moment, facing Professor Hulk's words full of doubt, Luo Sha, who slightly rotated the skull helmet, asked without any emotion, "Professor, I need to know the degree of harm that large doses of gamma rays have on ordinary people. Will it cause drastic physical mutations like you?" Professor Hulk, with a serious expression, nodded his head. He said to Luo Sha based on everything he knew, "Large doses of gamma radiation are fatal to all carbon-based life, but I don't rule out the possibility of those with amazing luck. The other party may become a special individual like me, but they may also be completely induced by gamma rays into some kind of huge monster. That's all we need to know for now, Professor. You'd better go back to base first. Leave the matter here to us." As soon as Luo Sha's voice fell, he quickly activated the light golden power armor on his body. The Raven Guard champions, wearing vibranium armor, also quickly moved their magnetic boots. They silently followed behind Luo Sha's tall figure and slowly infiltrated into the unfamiliar environment. After the tall figures of Luo Sha and the others had completely disappeared, Professor Hulk, who was standing in place, did not leave immediately. To be able to become such a large-scale living gamma radiation source, the other party must be a first-generation individual like me, and may even be familiar with me, but my old friends or enemies are all on the American continent. Who exactly is this unfamiliar existence? Bright sunshine shrouded the earth. A remote and quiet asphalt road had no traces of any vehicles passing through. For a time, it seemed that even the birdsong in the surrounding woods had completely disappeared. Luo Sha, who was constantly using shadow step under his feet, was leading 2 Raven Guard champions along the very empty road, silently launching a rapid run that was accompanied by the sound of wind. Soon after, when the extremely large nuclear power plant cooling towers were faintly visible, a military jeep that had unfortunately overturned on the side of the empty road was slowly rotating its useless rubber tires. Pa-ta, Luo Sha, driving the power armor, slammed on the magnetic boots. He raised his hand and gently waved his palm towards the Raven Guard champions behind him. Then, the 3 quickly and cautiously sneaked towards the direction of the jeep. The next second, whether it was Luo Sha or the Raven Guard champions, they clearly saw from the helmet eyepiece a soldier who seemed to be undergoing various physical mutations, lying on the ground full of gravel, twitching and trembling slightly. It seems that large doses of gamma radiation are more harmful to mutants than ordinary people. I wonder if Natasha, as an ordinary person, can survive. Luo Sha inside the skull helmet let out a sigh that was almost like a murmur. However, just as he was about to order the Raven Guards to follow him to continue forward, the soldier not far away, whose body flesh was constantly swelling and proliferating, actually tried hard to raise the terrifying head that was completely inhuman. He stared at the direction of Luo Sha and the others with a pair of blood-red eyes that were almost squeezed out of their sockets by flesh and blood. No matter who you are, please help me warn the elders of Winter Palace that the Chernobyl underground prison has been completely destroyed by an unknown energy, and all the mutant criminals imprisoned inside have either successfully escaped or become mindless monsters. Repeat, Chernobyl has fallen. Repeat, Chernobyl has fallen. At this moment, just as this tenacious soldier was doing his best to transmit important information, the other party, who couldn't help but let out a painful roar, was completely wrapped up by the constantly proliferating flesh and blood. The next second, before the flesh and blood monster, who had completely lost his mind, could get up and launch an attack, the bolters in the palms of the two Raven Guard champions completely erupted with violent roars. Boom boom boom. In an instant, the deformed monster of proliferating flesh was completely blasted into countless fragments by the astonishing power of the explosive shells. Wearing his skull helmet, Roche lowered his head and stared at the fleshy fragments scattered all over the ground. He took a deep breath and immediately contacted Iron Man David through the communication channel. David, have Tony quickly warn the people at the mutant embassy, and also have someone establish direct contact with the official departments of the entire country. Chernobyl is completely out of control right now. Whether human or mutant, if they don't want to die, they must not set foot in this area. Also, have Bucky move a sky carrier from above Europe. I need to use the Smart Control Legion on it. If the knights in the base have completed their repairs, send them over with the White Scars combat squad as well. Roche issued a series of mobilization orders cleanly and efficiently. After receiving an affirmative reply from Iron Man David, Roche, reactivating his golden power armor, quickly led two Raven Guard champions to explore deeper into Chernobyl. As Roche and the others gradually delved deeper, tragedies no less harrowing than the battlefield environment unfolded one by one within their visor's range. On a small town street not far from the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, apart from overturned or abandoned vehicles of all sizes, tens of thousands of civilians, having received a danger warning, crowded between several streets, trying to escape. All of them had lost their breath, remaining in a miserable state of being radiated to death by a large dose of gamma rays. Dong, dong, dong. Just then, Roche, who had subconsciously slowed his pace, passed by a mother whose face was swollen and festering, kneeling on the ground. The young woman seemed to have chosen to tightly wrap her newborn child in a biochemical protective suit before dying, as if this could shield the weak child from the ubiquitous radiation damage. Unfortunately, all her actions were futile struggles. The spread speed of gamma rays far exceeded their imagination. Therefore, the fragile lives of this human mother and child ultimately ended before Roche and the others arrived. If the deaths and miserable states of ordinary people were still within Rock's expectations, then, when the horrific corpses of many mutants also appeared behind more remains, Roche had a completely different understanding of this strange country dominated by mutants. If he wasn't mistaken, large doses of gamma rays seemed to cause completely different damage to different mutants. Those with extensive fleshy growths all over their bodies were generally flesh-based mutants. As for those energy-based or mental-based mutants, their fates were even more terrifying. At least in the short few minutes of continuous advancement, Roche had seen more than once through his visor the remains of mutants burning fiercely, or broken corpses whose entire bodies were completely frozen into transparent ice sculptures. Occasionally, there were also some headless corpses with completely exploded heads. But more importantly, almost all mutants, whether with fleshy growths or corrupted by chaotic energy, without exception, they chose to stay as far away from the crowds as possible and then commit suicide before completely losing control of themselves. Was it for the safety of the surrounding civilians, or to end their own suffering in advance? Judging from the tenacious will displayed by that soldier and the situation displayed on these sites, I am more inclined to the former. This is a rare spirit and awareness in the homeworld. Come on, champion brothers, let us speed up our pace and end this sudden, unprovoked disaster for this mutant nation as soon as possible. As Rock's uplifting words fell, he abruptly activated his power armor, immediately unleashing a shadow step, his whole body exuding a dark shadow. The two Dark Raven Guard Company champions, who had been following behind the Primarch, they also quickly entered stealth mode, constantly using shadow step. Following Roche silently, they rushed towards the interior of the nuclear power plant at full speed. Rumbling, accompanying the deep thunder gradually rumbling in the depths of the heavy clouds. Streaks of fleeting, dazzling lightning flashed across the sky above the Soviet Union's most important capital city. The next second, a tall figure wielding the Mjolnir hammer of Thor, wrapped in a whistling wind, heavily landed on the famous Red Square, completely scaring away a large number of ordinary people who came to travel or visit. However, before Thor, who was subconsciously grinning, could take a step towards the Winter Palace, the national power center almost within reach. Boom, boom, boom. Accompanied by the ear-splitting roar of countless mechanical engines, a series of fully armed armored personnel carriers and light tanks rushed out of the metal shelters located below the ground, well-trained, completely surrounding Thor. At the same time, special mutant flying units, each with differently shaped elytra or wings and various flight abilities, also landed with heavy firearms. With solemn expressions, they immediately aimed the heavy firearms in their palms firmly at Thor's position. Thor, God of Thunder from the Avenger Tribunal, you have trespassed into the territory and airspace of a sovereign nation. Surrender your hammer immediately. This is not a place where you damn superheroes can come and go as you please. And, you damned Yankees just can't learn to respect other people's countries, can you? Just then, as a light tank suddenly braked its roaring metal tracks. The top hatch above the tank turret was suddenly opened from the inside by a large, rough hand. Following that, a middle-aged man with a green general's uniform draped over his shoulders, covered in various badges, and with a hairstyle that seemed to naturally point outwards in two sharp horns, like a cat's head, slowly poked out his muscular upper body. He took a deep breath of the half-burned cheap cigar in his mouth and roared in a low voice towards Thor. Friend, first I need to correct one thing for you. I am not an earthling, I come from Asgard, I am the god of thunder in mythology, that is, an alien in your earth culture. At this moment, Thor, with a helpless expression, blinked his eyes slightly. He explained loudly to the middle-aged man in front of him. Also, I really didn't come to provoke your country, but your embassy over there doesn't believe our statement at all. Haven't you received any information yet? Not long ago, your nuclear power plant in the Chernobyl area, or rather, the underground prison specifically used to imprison super-powered criminals, exploded. Buzz buzz buzz, clang. One after another, metallic 10 rings, imbued with purple energy, continuously emitted buzzing vibrations. Their flight trajectory was incredibly agile as they rapidly tore through the air filled with gamma rays. Then, they heavily penetrated a massive, and completely irrational, mutated gamma monster. At this moment, Roche and the others had already arrived at the only entrance to the nuclear power plant. And as the distance closed, even the Auspex detection system inside the power armor was constantly sending important reminders to Roche. That was, the surrounding gamma ray dosage had risen to a new level. Clang. Therefore, many mutated gamma monsters who didn't have time to self-terminate began to reveal their terrifying figures. Caw caw caw, accompanied by the deep sound of mechanical valves turning again, and the terrifying corpses being constantly pushed aside. A heavy protective door, which countless mortal soldiers and mutants had desperately tried to close, but ultimately failed, was once again opened in front of Roche. And as the huge opening sound gradually echoed out, within a 1-kilometer radius, mutated gamma monsters wandering aimlessly quickly found their prey. Clang, boom boom boom. In an instant, the bolters in the palms of 2 Raven Guard champions roared. Bolts wrapped in conspicuous flames rapidly tore through the air, heavily bombarding the bodies of those constantly pouncing mutated gamma monsters. And Roche, casually drawing the melt-a-heart from his power armor's waist, also began to pull the trigger. He was using the scorching plasma energy constantly spewing out to suppress and kill those energy-based mutated gamma monsters with very conspicuous shapes. Soon after, the ammunition in the 2 bolters was exhausted, and the Raven Guard champions rapidly replaced their spare magazines. And the muzzle of the melt-a-heart in Rock's palm also slightly drooped. Clang. As for the concrete ground at the entrance of the nuclear power plant, it was already completely covered with fragments of exploded flesh and blood. Buzz buzz buzz. At this moment, Roche, whose tall body was surrounded by metallic 10 rings, slightly stretched out a pair of vibranium wings located behind the power armor. He immediately activated the power armor, taking the lead and slowly stepping into the deep entrance of the nuclear power plant. Just then, the mechanical voice of Iron Man David suddenly sounded in the communication channel inside the skull helmet. My lord, Thor has successfully established direct contact with the official forces of the mutant nation. The Inquisition of Vengeance has therefore obtained formal action authorization, so we can let go and do some things. Clang. At the same time, a large number of official rescue forces are in a state of mobilization, but judging from the huge damage of gamma rays to mutants, their help may not be of much use, unless the mutants plan to carry out this rescue operation regardless of casualties. In addition, the official forces of the mutants had no choice but to reveal a part of top-secret files to Thor. It turns out that the Chernobyl underground prison has been using the huge energy generated by the nuclear power plant above ground to imprison some mutants with difficult abilities or foreign invaders. Among them, the most dangerous is a blue giant whose energy level has been identified as Alpha level. Its code name is Nuke, and its real name is Rick Jones. He was a foreign invader who invaded the local territory out of control several years ago, and was captured by the mutant officials at the cost of a lot of energy and personnel losses. And according to the information I dug out from the network data, Rick Jones was also a colleague and friend of Dr. Banner in the past. That is to say, what we are facing now is very likely a completely out-of-control Hulk-level monster. Although I don't quite understand whether the mutant's level identification is reasonable, but according to the destructive power shown by the other party, I think it is absolutely necessary to treat this humanoid, Nuke, as an Alpha-level psychic with caution. At this moment, Rorschach, hearing Iron Man David's words, took a deep breath inside the skull helmet. He slammed on the magnetic boots and raised his hand to stop the Raven Guard champions from advancing. David, how long will it take for our Skybreaker to arrive above Chernobyl? Clang. It is expected to be half an hour later, but the White Scars combat squad and 2 knights are ready, and they can launch a teleport to your nearby area at any time. Then let everyone speed up. I'm afraid that the longer the processing time is delayed, the greater the harm caused by the other party will be. Rock's words had just fallen. He drove the power armor without hesitation, immediately led the Raven Guard champions and turned around to start the evacuation operation towards the entrance of the nuclear power plant. Whether the culprit is a Hulk-level out-of-control monster, or a humanoid gamma nuke equivalent to an Alpha-level psychic, it was simply a fantastic thing for him and 2 Raven Guards to deal with in a narrow space that was not suitable for maneuvering. Clang. As for Natasha's life and death, judging from the series of situations that are currently occurring, it has become the least important thing instead. Boom boom boom. At this moment, Rorschach, whose beast senses were functioning, suddenly turned the skull helmet. And accompanied by a burst of heavy footsteps from the depths of the nuclear power plant passage, a giant brown bear with a height of about 5 meters, whose entire body was covered with clumps of flesh and blood hyperplasia in its brown fur, rushed out of the dimly lit depths of the passage like a speeding heavy train. Clang. Its eyes constantly emitting blood-red light, it quickly launched an extremely fierce attack towards Rorschach and the others, blocking the front of the only exit. Roar. In an instant, a deafening beast roar resounded around. The Raven Guard champion closest to the enemy only had time to turn the bolter muzzle, and draw out the vibranium power sword from behind the power pack. It was slammed heavily on its tall body by a huge bear paw wrapped in traces of red energy. The next second, just as this Raven Guard champion flew backwards, another Astartes who successfully used Shadow Step quickly arrived at the side of the giant brown bear. Clang. 2 power claws fixed above the palm, wrapped in a blue decomposition force field, were inserted fiercely into the giant brown bear's body and stirred back and forth. However, this big guy that appeared in front of everyone was not an ordinary mutated beast, but an evil mutant known as the Demon Bear, who devoured many mutant children. The offensive means that were fatal enough for ordinary flesh and blood creatures were simply not worth mentioning for the Demon Bear in front of him. Rumble, accompanied by vibrations and roars from the air. The second Raven Guard champion was also heavily slapped onto the passage wall by a huge bear paw wrapped in traces of red energy. Clang. The whole person forcibly smashed a large hole with a diameter of several meters in it. Buzz buzz buzz. But at the same time, Rorschach, whose light golden power armor was constantly emitting a low buzzing sound, also quickly raised 2 empty palms. In the blink of an eye, an extremely heavy Dawnbreaker Warhammer was successfully extracted from the simulator's storage space by him. Ha! In a flash of lightning and flint, the fully focused Luo Shah raised the Dawnbringer Warhammer high. Then, he used all his strength to smash down on the Demon Bear, which was close at hand. Rumble. The next second, accompanied by shockwaves visible to the naked eye in the air and the Demon Bear's subconscious terrifying wail, the massive monster rolled rapidly towards the depths of the passage like a pinball. At the same time, centered on Luo Shah, visible cracks spread continuously forward across the concrete floor. Dong! The power armor emitted a low hum as Luo Sha heavily planted the Dawnbringer Warhammer in his hands on the ground. Wearing a skull helmet, he took a deep breath but did not drive the power armor to pursue the demon bear for a victory. "Everyone, retreat with me," Luo Sha immediately called out to the Raven Guard champions who had just risen from the rubble-strewn ground. Reacting quickly, everyone turned and ran towards the outside of the passage. Roar! At this moment, the demon bear, whose entire skull and most of its spine were almost completely shattered, faintly emitted a muffled beastly roar. Chi chi chi! Streams of red energy from within rapidly filled the missing flesh on its body. And with the massive consumption of red energy, clumps of flesh and growth matter on its massive brown-haired body were also rapidly growing and spreading. Soon after, the demon bear, whose mental state became increasingly violent, slowly got up from the ground. It couldn't help but shake its newly restored, but already covered with fleshy growths, massive head. Then, it quickly changed direction and launched a very frantic charge towards the outside of the passage. At the same time, Luo Sha and the others, who had changed the battlefield, were also prepared to continue fighting. When the incomparably violent demon bear had just taken a step out of the passage entrance. Boom boom boom, accompanied by the buzzing and trembling that suddenly cut through the air. The Dawnbringer Warhammer, as if gradually reviving its power, was once again swung forcefully by Luo Sha. Bang bang bang, when the Warhammer's huge hammerhead heavily landed on the side of the demon bear's massive body. A large amount of flesh tissue that exploded outwards almost completely hollowed out a large part of the opponent's body. Even the constantly flying shattered ribs and spine, and those mutated internal organs, were quickly exposed to the gamma radiation-filled air. Immediately following, the bolter fire from the Raven Guard champions also rapidly poured down on the demon bear's massive head, temporarily suppressing it in place. The next second, Luo Sha, whose breathing rhythm was becoming increasingly heavy, swung the Dawnbringer Warhammer again. He smashed it heavily towards the thick spine that was faintly revealed on the demon bear's massive body. Rumble, with another deafening roar that echoed around. The terrifying shockwave and continuously shattering ground marks that erupted from the Dawnbringer rapidly spread towards a radius of dozens of meters. At this moment, this massive demon bear was actually smashed into a bloody, unrecognizable two pieces by Luo Sha using the heavy warhammer. Dong! Luo Sha, whose arms and even entire body wrapped in the vibranium armor were faintly trembling from exhaustion, threw down the extremely heavy Dawnbringer warhammer. He quickly activated the power armor to step forward, reached out to take out the heart of the forge from his waist. Without hesitation, he continuously pulled the trigger towards the direction of the bear's head, which was emitting a miserable howl. Zzzz zzzz. The scorching plasma spheres that continuously sprayed out of the muzzle completely submerged the demon bear's upper body. It also instantly enveloped the opponent's massive head, which was growing fleshy growths, and quickly melted it away. Hu Kai! Only then did Luo Sha, wearing the skull helmet, take a deep breath and subconsciously adjust his breathing rhythm. He slightly rotated the helmet's visor, stared at the Dawnbringer warhammer that was embedded deeply into the ground not far away, and muttered to himself. First of all, this is a hammer. Secondly, the power of blunt force strikes alone is amazing enough. The only problem is that it's too heavy. As soon as Luo Sha's words fell, blue square barriers of varying sizes quickly appeared around him. Immediately following, the White Scars combat squad wearing white painted power armor and two knight armors, each 9 meters tall, were teleported by the space-time platform to the nearby ground. At this moment, the reinforcement troops from the Gemini Island base had finally arrived. Inside the Sky Carrier's bridge, Bucky, wearing an Imperial Navy uniform, stood upright in front of the control platform. A large number of automated servitors were performing various complex navigation operations like dutiful menials. Bucky's metal arm, deliberately rolled up at the sleeve to reveal the Mechanicus symbol, was behind his back. Also, it made him look more like a serious captain in charge of issuing orders. In fact, because all the crew members on the mothership are automated servitors. Therefore, even the most basic operations are completely automated. The current Bucky is less a captain and more a human mascot belonging to the automated servitors on the Sky Carrier. Buzz buzz buzz. At this moment, a sudden teleportation sound from a bridge floor not far from the control platform quickly attracted Bucky's attention. Turning his head, he had not received a teleportation request or order from Iron Man David. Moreover, the teleportation technology in front of him did not look like a product of the Gemini Island base. However, just as Bucky subconsciously drew his laser pistol from his waist and planned to call the surrounding automated servitors and mobilize the intelligence core to launch an attack. Buzz buzz buzz. The next second, an oval purple energy portal quickly appeared in his field of vision. Attention all crew members, boarding action. Launch a counterattack immediately. At this moment, Bucky, whose expression suddenly changed, roared loudly at the surroundings. His entire person had already nimbly flipped over the edge of the control platform and ran quickly towards the front position of the teleportation portal. Long time no see, Bucky. However, after a tall figure carrying Thor's hammer in his palm took the lead in stepping out of the energy teleportation portal. The other party's familiar face and voice made Bucky's heart, which had been raised high, return to his stomach. Thor, could you give a heads up before initiating a teleport? I almost thought it was an enemy launching a boarding action. The next moment, Bucky, who immediately waved his hand to stop the large number of automated servitors from surrounding him, couldn't help but curse at Thor, who was not far away. And after hearing Bucky's enthusiastic words, Thor, whose face subconsciously revealed an awkward smile, slightly shook the golden hair on his head. He said to Bucky, whose expression was unkind, I just forgot, and this teleportation portal wasn't opened by me either. It was opened by a local mutant friend. Come on, new friends, this is our own territory. As soon as Thor's words fell, a middle-aged woman with orange-red hair and blue skin covered with fine bumps, exposed outside her military uniform, slowly stepped out of the energy teleportation portal. And after the other party vigilantly sized up Bucky, whose expression was equally so. A metal cockpit suspended above the ground also slowly carried a gaunt old man with snow-white hair completely into the sky carrier's bridge. Alas, it's been a long time since I've been out and about to stretch my muscles and bones. I really miss the days when I used to launch operations everywhere. Hello, young captain, you can call me Max, but those friends or enemies who are familiar with me prefer to call me Magneto. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Almost simultaneously, several wide highways in the surrounding flatlands 50 kilometers away from the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Armored personnel carriers loaded with large numbers of mutant warriors, and hundreds of tank armor formations are heading rapidly towards the intangible gamma radiation edge. Soon after, as the distance continued to close, hundreds and thousands of mutant warriors with different body shapes, but full of capable temperament, constantly jumped out of the armored personnel carriers' internal compartments. Dressed in green military uniforms, they briefly gathered and called the roll. Immediately, under the personal leadership of a mutant political commissar, with solemn expressions, they began to go against the flow towards the large group of people who were retreating. And every civilian who successfully escaped the gamma radiation did not show overly sad negative emotions on their faces. Ah, our troops are here. We are saved. Everyone is saved. At this moment, gradually quieting down, they just stared at the mutant warriors passing by with expectant eyes, while silently praying for them in their hearts. About a dozen minutes later, the mutant political commissar, who was leading the mutant warriors on a forced march, suddenly raised a palm. All comrades, stop advancing. And the positions of the others' eyes also emitted visible white detection rays outwards like searchlights. Chi chi chi. At this moment, the mutant warriors, whose every action could be said to be strictly prohibited, had already stopped their neat steps, waiting for the next order from the mutant political commissar. Just then, a female mutant warrior with a nervous expression jogged all the way and rushed directly behind the mutant political commissar. However, before she had time to say anything, the mutant political commissar's loud voice completely resounded around. Comrades, General Logan and the elders of the Winter Palace have repeatedly told you the specific situation, so I won't repeat it again. This time, it is a terrifying disaster and a huge crisis that our entire country has encountered in a century. And according to the cautious speculation of a seer elder who is proficient in prophecy, there are currently 30,000 to 50,000 civilians and mutant compatriots who have unfortunately lost their lives due to the spread of gamma radiation. And we, as mutants, with all kinds of superpowers, are the only existence that those ordinary people can rely on. We must do everything in our power to stop the continued spread of gamma rays. First, to buy more time for our new friends who are in the center of the battlefield and are willing to step forward to help us, and second, to protect those who support us, treat us kindly, the vast number of people, and the only homeland of all of us. Comrades, the time has come for the elders and the people to test us. At this moment, the mutant political commissar, whose eyes repeatedly emitted white light, shouted loudly at the thousands of mutant warriors in front of him with a hoarse voice. And after the blood and belief in the hearts of the tense crowd were gradually mobilized. Taking a deep breath, the mutant political commissar immediately turned his head to look at the female mutant warrior beside him, whose expression was gradually becoming firm. Comrade Nova, are you ready? According to the country's regulations and mutant regulations, you should not have stepped onto the battlefield with us, because your superpower does not have any lethality, and is only suitable for production tasks, but currently the special mechanism of your superpower may bring great convenience to our subsequent actions, so the elders had to let you come. The mutant political commissar's words had just fallen. This female mutant warrior, Nova, who seemed to be not long after adulthood, nodded her head vigorously. She slightly widened her bright eyes and shouted loudly at the mutant political commissar in front of her without fear. Comrade political commissar, for the bright future of mutants and the people, and for the entire country, please give me the order. Regarding the passionate emotions displayed by Comrade Nova, the mutant political commissar, whose expression became more and more serious, immediately nodded and said, "Very good, Comrade Nova, I believe in your conviction and faith. Please immediately use your superpower to completely reveal those invisible gamma radiations. Remember, the entire operation has not ended for a moment, even if it consumes your life force. You must maintain the continuous release state of the superpower, understand?" At this moment, the female mutant warrior Nova, who nodded her head vigorously once again, took a deep breath. She slowly faced the invisible gamma radiation not far away and stretched out her arms. In the next second, the skin color of the other person's entire body exposed outside the green military uniform had completely turned into a very attractive pink. At the same time, the invisible gamma rays, whose radiation range almost reached a diameter of tens of kilometers, were gradually completely rendered into a clearly visible light pink from the edge position. Immediately afterwards, the mutant political commissar, who raised a palm again, also flowed out strands of constantly wriggling white light from inside his eyes, quickly connecting to every mutant warrior. Comrades, listen to my orders, activate your energy shields together, let us work together to completely push back the already manifested gamma radiation. Remember, be sure to control the structure and quality of the energy shields within the smallest range, and do not allow these extremely harmful gamma radiations to leak out even a bit. At this moment, the mutant political commissar's slightly strenuous words gradually echoed around. Buzzing, along with a colorful energy beam soaring into the sky, a layer of huge energy shields, gradually gathered together by layers of different properties of energy, gradually inverted on those already clearly visible gamma radiations, and completely shrouded the entire Chernobyl area. Ready, start. When the pear blossoms are blooming all over the world, Katyusha stands on the handsome shore. At this moment, accompanied by the melodious military songs that gradually sounded to encourage the morale of the people. This incomparably huge energy shield is gradually compressing its own quality, slowly but firmly controlling the spread of a large amount of gamma radiation. Inside the Sky Carrier's bridge, Bucky, with a frown, is questioning Thor's unauthorized entry of mutants, regardless of friend or foe, into the ship. And when Bucky learned that this matter had been temporarily approved by Iron Man David and Grandmaster Tony. As the captain, his expression showed a slightly helpless sigh. Then, Bucky turned his head to look at the gaunt old man who was manipulating the metal cockpit to patrol and observe back and forth inside the bridge. "Mr. Max, although you are the Grand Elder of the mutants, our Terra Star Realm Legion also welcomes you to visit this place, but the matters on the battlefield should still be left to us. It is said that gamma rays are far more lethal to mutants and even carbon-based organisms than expected. Our leader, Rorschach, is also taking great risks to fight on the ground. You don't need to come here to add to the chaos, do you?" Bucky, with an indifferent expression, narrowed his eyes and stared at the other party. And facing Bucky's slightly sarcastic words, the gray-haired, gaunt old man did not show any signs of anger. With a smile on his lips, he just slowly manipulated the metal cockpit to move towards the large porthole in front of the bridge. "Hee, little comrade, don't be angry. This old thing just looks a little old, it's not useless, and when I was young, I personally participated in the large-scale projects of building the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and the underground prison. It can be said that no one is more familiar with the architectural structure there than me. Look, the energy shield to stop the spread of gamma rays has been raised, and our people have also begun to act, so next, it's time for me, the Grand Elder, to contribute to those mutant children. Squeak, squeak, squeak. At this moment, accompanied by a sudden metal hum or magnetic field friction sound that resounded throughout the sky, the huge sky carrier, which had successfully arrived directly above Chernobyl, was actually firmly suspended in the sky at a height of thousands of meters in an extremely strange hovering posture. In the next second, under Thor's slightly curious gaze and Bucky's gradually widened eyes, the gaunt old man, who had slowly closed his eyes, suddenly stretched out a withered old palm with intertwined bones towards the bottom. Rise for me, rumble. In an instant, the entire Chernobyl area, heavily enveloped in a massive energy barrier, was plunged into an earthquake. Even the pale pink air, filled with countless gamma radiation, continuously erupted with terrifying sounds like thunder. And when it came to the ground, everything was shaking violently involuntarily. Moreover, most of the brick and stone structures completely collapsed and were destroyed, raising a large amount of dust. Squeak, accompanied by another magnetic field friction hum that almost resounded throughout the entire Chernobyl sky. That vast land, occupying several square kilometers, the massive nuclear power plant, whose foundation seemed to be completely cast and filled with a layer of metallic substance, was actually slowly lifted into the air as if grasped by an invisible, terrifying giant hand. In an instant, an amount of sand and earth sufficient to completely bury a city continuously scattered frantically from beneath the huge foundation of the nuclear power plant. And just as the terrifying sandstorm, constantly formed by the accumulation of a large amount of sand and gravel, swept through. Pong pong pong, accompanied by bursts of roaring sounds from metal collisions. A massive metallic creation, with an overall shape like an inverted pyramid, with a volume comparable to a high-rise building, was also forcibly pulled out from the depths of the ground by the ubiquitous terrifying magnetic field. Rumble. Only a few tens of seconds later, moist soil, like a torrential rain, scattered across the ground. That inverted pyramid creation, completely detached from the depths of the ground, was immediately thrown by the instigator, located thousands of meters in the air, casually towards the ground not far away. And the massive shockwave generated by the crashing down almost instantly destroyed those city buildings that had survived the previous earthquake. Immediately afterwards, the nuclear power plant, slowly suspended hundreds of meters in the air, once again carried an incomparably astonishing and terrifying momentum, and heavily fell back towards the ground below, completely filling the underground cavity that had not yet been processed. At this moment, the progress of everything seemed so simple and crude, but it left people speechless. It can only be said that even if he changed his faith and camp, Magneto is still a man of great influence. Huff. Almost at the same time, in front of the bridge porthole of the sky carrier, the gray-haired, gaunt old man, Max, turned pale and let out a burst of uncontrollable, violent panting. And the old hand of the other party, with blue veins bulging on the back of his hand, also trembled slightly and drooped down to the edge of the metal cockpit. At this time, the middle-aged woman standing not far away changed her expression slightly. The strangely looking woman immediately ran to Magneto Max's side. Alas, I'm still old. I remember that when I buried the underground prison under the nuclear power plant, it wasn't so difficult. Time waits for no one. How is it, this dumbfounded little comrade, are you satisfied with this old guy's methods? Now you can notify the leader of your Terra Star Realm Legion. I have already helped him drag the culprit of this disaster out from the ground. They don't need to waste any more effort to explore the underground prison in depth. At this moment, the gaunt old man, whose pale face gradually recovered a trace of blood, controlled the metal cockpit to turn in one direction. He waved his old hand weakly, stopping the middle-aged woman's concerned actions. Then, Magneto, with a smile on his face, looked at Captain Bucky, whose expression had been changing back and forth, from the initial shock to the current paleness. As for Thor, who was standing next to Bucky, if it weren't for the fact that he knew the occasion was wrong while holding Thor's hammer tightly, I'm afraid he would immediately raise his hand and applaud this extremely wonderful performance. It should be known that Magneto Max, as the oldest elder in the mutant group, he is even one of the behind-the-scenes controllers of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations. The reason why the other party would rather risk so many risks and personally come to the sky carrier of a strange organization, in addition to complete trust in his own beliefs and abilities, it is also to show Saul and Bucky and others, or the Avengers Judgment Court and the Terra Star Realm Legion behind them, the national heritage and the attitude of the mutants. Even if the other party currently looks like an old man who is not long for this world. But no one can be sure. If an Omega-level mutant powerhouse falls into a dead end, what kind of terrifying destructive power will he unleash on his enemies? I am just a mere mortal captain. At most I have undergone some biochemical mechanical modifications. Naturally I am not as good as a mutant powerhouse like you who can shake the world. However, I think we have also released enough goodwill to you, otherwise the Terra Star Realm Legion and the Avengers Judgment Court would not have to work so hard. After all, this accident is a huge disaster that happened in your own country. If we don't care, you may have to pay far more than you are now. Quote, at this moment, Bucky, who took a deep breath, gradually sorted out his thoughts. He slowly straightened his back, and before the unruly Saul could speak, he said to Magneto in an understated and neither humble nor arrogant tone. Magneto Max stared at Bucky, who was fearless, with a gratified expression. He nodded his gray-haired head and said with a light smile, "Little comrade, you are right, so in order to express basic respect, I came to your territory in person. And the mutant group and all the ordinary people will recognize your efforts and remember your help to the entire country. However, I don't think now is a good time for you and me to discuss this matter. Why don't we wait until everything is settled, and I, as the representative of the mutants, meet with your leader, Luo Sha." As soon as Magneto Max finished speaking, Captain Bucky, who maintained a calm expression, nodded subconsciously. He turned his gaze and said, "I think Lord Luo Sha will look forward to meeting you. Now is not the time to delay. All robot crew members, listen to my orders, start releasing the Intelligent Control Legion downwards." Buzz buzz buzz, accompanied by the buzzing sound from the servo device in electronic muscle bundles. The tall figure covered with sand and dust on the pale golden vibranium power armor slowly climbed up from a cracked hole in the ground. And around Luo Sha, who was slightly embarrassed, the chief storm seer of the White Scars and several Astartes, as well as the Raven Guard champions, also propped open the remnants of the buildings that fell on them, slowly revealing their tall bodies. Boom boom boom. Not far away, two Sovereign-class knight armors, almost buried by the remains of buildings, also re-exploded with the roar of engines. The knight captains inside quickly checked the signs of damage on the huge metal bodies through various systems. Then they slowly moved their heavy steps, passed through the light pink gamma radiation, and approached Luo Sha's direction. There's no need to guess this. Besides, Magneto, there are not many people in the mutant world who can control such a large-scale magnetic field change. And even if the other party likes to make big scenes, at least he should give the people below a warning, right? At this moment, Luo Sha, shaking his skull helmet vigorously, looked up at the shadowy sky carrier outside the 1,000-meter-high sky. He cursed angrily a few times. A few minutes ago, the crowd, who had no time to run far, was completely trapped within the ground around the nuclear power plant by the sudden powerful magnetic field and the collapsing buildings. Luo Sha can also be regarded as personally experiencing the mutant powerhouse of the native world. The terrifying state when his superpowers are completely polished to the peak. Faced with this level of mutant powerhouse, unless the Emperor himself appears and possesses him, or relies on a Legion-level Astartes to carry out a suicide attack of the Extermination Order. Otherwise, it is wishful thinking for Luo Sha, as a Primarch, to conquer the entire mutant country by force alone. Even if he transferred the entire Shark Eater fleet to the native world, it is not of much use to Magneto, who can control the planet's magnetic field. After all, the other party's superpowers actually inherently restrain all metal-based technological creations. For mutants, let's take a diplomatic alliance attitude. Even the Emperor's war of unification of Terra was not completely pushed through by force. Fortunately, I didn't choose to use force to conquer the native world in the first place, otherwise, I would have to face a bunch of troublesome mutant enemies now. At this moment, Luo Sha, driving the power armor, thought silently while carrying the Dawnbringer Warhammer hard. However, at this time, as a large amount of dust continued to fall deep in the huge prison like an inverted pyramid in the distance, a terrifying sound of metal twisting and tearing gradually sounded. Squeak. At this moment, the underground prison, made of mixed metal, is thick and strong enough to barely confine most mutant criminals. It is erupting with a deafening, terrifying roar. Crack, crack, crack. As the inverted pyramid-shaped metal structure continues to emit violent tremors that spread to the surroundings, and continuously sends chunks of metal debris, up to a foot thick, flying from the outer walls. A huge breach, forcibly torn open from the inside, suddenly appears in the ubiquitous pale pink gamma rays. Immediately afterwards, accompanied by the energy light gradually brightening from the depths of the breach. A behemoth, its entire blue skin covered in visible gamma rays, and with a height of about 7 meters, slowly steps out of the interior of the underground prison. Looking closely, above the opponent's sturdy body, which barely retains a human shape, a terrifying head covered with a large number of blue blood vessel networks is struggling to widen a pair of emotionless, never blinking, round, hollow eyes. But what is even more astonishing, or rather, even more bizarre, is that another distorted human face with an expression of extreme pain is struggling back and forth around the opponent's terrifying head, as if trying to completely break free from under the opponent's blue skin. Boom, boom, boom. Just as the blue giant, nuclear bomb, which is obviously the source of this gamma radiation disaster, steps its 2 huge feet onto the moist, damp soil. Inside the huge breach behind it, mutant gamma monsters, completely out of control due to gamma radiation, rush out towards the free world like a swarm of tides. And their total number basically wipes out all the mutant criminals imprisoned in the underground prison. Chi, chi, chi. At this moment, accompanied by a series of clear trajectories gradually rising into the air, whirlwind missiles, launched by Dominator-class knight armors, quickly unleash a covering barrage towards the enemy's location. Whether it is the surrounding mutant gamma monsters, numbering in the hundreds, or the blue giant, nuclear bomb, itself, all are enveloped by the exploding firelight. Seeing that the culprit has appeared, Primarch Rogel, as the battlefield commander, does not hesitate at all. He immediately orders 2 Dominator-class knight armors to take the lead in launching suppressive fire at the opponent. Subsequently, Rogel, who is striving to drive his power armor, also immediately leads 7 Astartes. Quickly passing through the surrounding gamma radiation and broken ground, they launch a rapid charge towards the enemy's location. Boom, boom, boom. In the next moment, as a large amount of exploding firelight and smoke quickly dissipate. After a round of fire bombardment, most of the mutant gamma monsters are blasted into pieces of flesh and blood scattered all over the ground by the explosive power of the whirlwind missiles. But only the most conspicuous and most important target, the blue giant, nuclear bomb, is unscathed. On the contrary, it completely focuses its attention on the attacking crowd. Roar. The blue giant, roaring terrifyingly, suddenly shakes its huge blue body. It subconsciously takes heavy steps, launching an even more ferocious counterattack towards Rogel and the others who are rushing towards it. Boom, boom, boom. 2 incomparably huge bare feet repeatedly shatter the ground, leaving behind conspicuous large pits. It also allows the massive blue giant, nuclear bomb, to suddenly leap up from the ground. Then, the opponent falls heavily towards the central position of the Astartes squad like a blue meteorite. Bang! As a large amount of dust and gravel fly around, a Raven Guard champion, who has just used Shadow Step to try to dodge and flank, is grabbed by the blue giant's huge hand at the thigh, which has not completely left reality. In the next second, the opponent, like a rag doll being swung around at will, is sent flying towards the ground hundreds of meters away. At the same time, a White Scar battle brother, whose reaction is slightly slower, is also kicked hard in the front of his chest and abdomen armor by a huge blue foot. And as a large amount of exploding ceramite fragments fly around, the Astartes, whose entire spine seems to be instantly folded in half, also flies backwards rapidly. 2 knight captains try to launch a ranged attack. Attract the opponent's attention. Everyone, spread out quickly. Use bolters to kite and harass. Don't try to fight it head-on in close combat. At this moment, Rogel, who is using all his strength to swing the Dawnbreaker, suddenly lets out a roar that resounds throughout the surroundings. The heavy hammerhead, wrapped in a terrifying whistling sound, falls heavily on the side of the blue giant, nuclear bomb's, sturdy chest and abdomen. In the next second, visible shock waves suddenly appear. On the blue giant's body, whose broad back is slightly hunched, a large amount of blue flesh and blood, along with bone fragments, are constantly blown outwards. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Immediately afterwards, a series of psychic lightning bolts released by the White Scar Stormseers continuously strike the staggering blue giant. But at this moment, Rogel, who is leaning on the Dawnbreaker to quickly recover his strength, keenly notices through his helmet's visor that, with the continuous release of a large amount of psychic lightning, The severe injuries on the blue giant's body, which is being bombarded by a large number of bolters and lascannons, are actually healing at a terrifying speed visible to the naked eye. Brother Librarian, stop releasing psychic lightning immediately. This guy can absorb energy to heal injuries. Before Rogel's voice fades away, his skull helmet quickly rotating, he casually puts away the unwieldy Dawnbreaker Warhammer. Taking a deep breath, Rogel suddenly raises his two vibranium arms. A series of metal 10 rings, filled with purple energy, quickly enter above the skull helmet. Then, they rapidly rotate into circles of kinetically terrifying metal storms, completely enveloping the blue giant, who is quickly recovering his combat vitality. Thud, the brother librarian, who has just interrupted the psychic lightning and successfully deployed a psychic shield, is sent flying by the blue giant's huge fist, which is terrifying in power, and tumbles and falls towards the ground tens of meters away. And the blue giant, whose massive body is repeatedly impacted and penetrated by the metal 10 rings, immediately locks its pair of hollow eyes above its terrifying head firmly on Rogel, who is almost within reach. Boom, boom, boom. But at this moment, accompanied by a terrifying roar from above the sky, hundreds of Thanatar siege automata, wielding buzzing chainswords, fall heavily on the ground not far from Rogel. In the next second, these loyal and fearless mind-locked legions launch a headlong charge towards the blue giant's direction like rabid metal dogs. Buzz buzz buzz, a large number of Aoi monster machine guards wriggled their serpentine metal bodies back and forth. Chainsaw swords with rapidly rotating sharp serrations also slashed through the air, fiercely cutting into the blue giant's massive body. In an instant, a large amount of broken flesh and blue blood filled with gamma radiation splashed all over the surrounding ground. Even the blue giant, who kept roaring in anger, desperately waved his thick fists and feet. But every time the opponent knocked away the Aoi monster machine guards close at hand. Before the Aoi monster machine guards that had been knocked away could crash to the ground, more Aoi monster machine guards would pounce fiercely towards the blue giant's body. Dealing with this kind of powerful gamma monster that is thick-skinned, has regenerative abilities, and is only suitable for close combat. The Zerg-like controlled legion that purely believes in quantity overcoming quality is always the most suitable combat force. At this moment, just as Rourke was strenuously driving the power armor, running back and forth around the encirclement where the fierce battle was taking place. At the same time, he repeatedly manipulated the buzzing metal 10 rings, constantly adding trouble and pressure to the blue giant's counterattack. Except for a few hundred meters away, two Sovereign-class knight armors that had completed reloading ammunition once again launched a fire bombardment. Rumble rumble, along with the sound of metal treads crushing the ground and the roar of countless engines together. A tank cluster formation that quickly appeared in the depths of the light red gamma radiation gradually approached the edge of the entire battlefield. The next second, as the firing angles of a large number of turrets were adjusted, the sound of extremely terrifying artillery fire completely suppressed any movement from the center of the battlefield. Unexpectedly to Rourke, the mutant armored forces actually came here despite the ubiquitous light red gamma radiation. They disregarded everything and launched a very tenacious offensive against the blue giant, nuclear bomb, who was the culprit. And with the continuous artillery fire coverage and the repeated cutting attacks of the Aoi monster machine guards, the blue giant, whose speed of offensive movements and the momentum of roaring gradually weakened, also slowly curled up on the smoke-filled earth in a weak posture, kneeling on one knee. However, just as Rourke and the others thought that the other party could not hold on any longer. Chirr chirr chirr, the ubiquitous gamma radiation in the air actually began to rapidly backflow into the terrifying body of the blue giant, which was almost only a huge skeleton left. When those visible light-pink gamma rays within a radius of dozens of kilometers completely disappeared within the scope of the eyepiece, a blue giant whose injuries had completely recovered and whose massive size of up to 7 meters had increased by a circle overall quickly got up from the ground. Then, he subconsciously let out a deafening terrifying roar towards the Aoi monster machine guards surrounding him. Buzz buzz buzz. At this moment, Rourke, who quickly transformed a pair of vibranium wings into propulsion devices, suddenly drove the power armor forward. He casually opened the simulator's storage page and reached inside, and a group of 10 melt bombs quickly fell into a vibranium palm. The next second, the Aoi monster machine guards, who were constantly being blasted away by the blue giant, seemed to have received an order. They frantically wrapped their metal bodies around the opponent's thick limbs, desperately restricting any movement or action of the blue giant. Immediately afterwards, Rourke, who quickly levitated into midair, pulled the detonating switches of all the melt bombs. Then he immediately reversed direction and launched a dive bombing towards the location of the blue giant. Rumble rumble. In an instant, a series of dazzling rays of light that lit up in the air covered the center of the battlefield. A terrifying high-temperature heat wave that far exceeded the shelling and firepower suppression immediately enveloped the blue giant and a large number of Aoi monster machine guards completely inside. And the terrifying shock waves and extreme high temperatures that were constantly emitted outward also made the Astartes who were launching attacks within a radius of hundreds of meters quickly search for shelters on the ground. Even the two Sovereign-class knight armors stopped their shooting behavior and nimbly leapt towards the rear of the battlefield. After Rourke, who was tumbling back and forth in midair, quickly stabilized his tall body using the propulsion device. His line of sight immediately looked down through the eyepiece of the skull helmet, only to see that at the location where the original blue giant was, there was only a lava pit with a diameter of about dozens of meters left. However, in the depths of the lava pit, which was covered with dark red metal juices, half of a huge skeleton that was still in a melting state was emitting wisps of light pink gamma radiation outward. Just from the range and quality of the radiation, it looked more like the residual radiation carried by the huge skeleton itself. At this moment, the gamma monster blue giant, nuclear bomb, that caused this natural disaster and man-made misfortune, finally fell under one of the most commonly used comeback methods of Rourke and even any Astartes, the melt bomb. And as the Astartes holding bolters drove the power armor out of the nearby shelters, in the adventurous act of a tank lifting the turret hatch also temporarily put a satisfactory end to the entire sudden incident. Not long after, Rourke, who had landed on the ground again, obtained a simple casualty statistic. Apart from hundreds of Aoi monster machine guards who bravely sacrificed themselves and died together with the blue giant, among the 7 Astartes who fought with him before, only one battle brother from the White Scars was accidentally seriously injured because he had faced the blue giant's terrifying offensive head-on. However, after using the panacea, the other party also entered a very stable recovery period and was not in serious condition. At this moment, Rourke, who drove the power armor, instructed the Raven Guard champions beside him a few words. He also stepped forward to start a basic exchange with the tank formation commander who was wearing a heavy radiation protection suit. During the conversation, the unfamiliar parties first shook hands in a friendly manner. And after Rourke refused the cheap cigar that the other party handed over casually, this General Logan, codenamed Wolverine, also tried to build a relationship with Rourke without caring. And he was inquiring about what kind of high-tech weapon the melt bomb that Rourke had just used was. In this regard, Rourke, who intended to implement diplomatic alliance methods with the mutants, did not explain too much. He took out a melt bomb that he had always carried with him from the storage space behind the power armor. Then, in the name of a combat gift, he gave it to General Logan in front of him. As for whether the mutant side can use various technologies or even superpower methods to perform reverse engineering, to be honest, Rourke is not worried about this. After all, the technological level of the Warhammer universe is not so easy to crack. Even Reed Richards, known as the pinnacle of human intelligence, also studied with Doom for a period of time before barely getting started. Soon after, a large number of automatic servo robots were released from the mothership, and more disciplined mutant warriors began to enter the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, which was like a ruin. This joint team worked hard to search for possible survivors and collect the many incomplete corpses. Although they no longer held much hope, as the leader of the Legion, Rorschach still allowed the Astartes to join the search operation, even if it was just to recover Natasha's body. The next moment, 2 magnetic boots slammed to the ground. Rorschach immediately activated the propulsion device and quickly ascended into the air, flying rapidly towards the Sky Mothership. Several minutes later, inside the brightly lit bridge, Rorschach, wearing vibranium power armor, slowly stepped into the area. He first removed the skull helmet that covered his head, then raised his hand and patted Captain Bucky on the shoulder to show encouragement. Immediately afterward, Rorschach reluctantly gave a strong hug to Thor, who was always enthusiastic. And after Rorschach quickly met with his own people, he slowly turned his sharp gaze. Driving the light golden power armor, he stepped forward and made first contact with Magneto Max, who was waiting quietly, and a middle-aged woman who looked like Mystique. Next, the two sides first made some official remarks as usual. Then Magneto Max changed the subject. Slightly raising his head, he looked at the tall figure standing in front of him and said with a chuckle, "I never thought that the leader of the Terra Star Realm Legion would be such a young man. It is indeed admirable for the younger generation. Even mutants have to admit they are getting old." Roche, whose bronze face showed no expression, shook his head slightly. Subconsciously narrowing his eyes, he looked down at Magneto sitting in the metal cockpit and said lightly, "Mr. Max, there is no need for these flattering words. Why don't you just say what's on your mind? How about we communicate more openly with each other?" "Very good, straightforward, I like your unpretentious style. It reminds me of my youthful impulsiveness." At this moment, Magneto, whose expression gradually became serious, nodded his gray-haired head. He took a deep breath and continued to say to Roche, "We will conduct a more detailed investigation into the real cause of the Chernobyl disaster, and then report the contents to your Terra Star Realm Legion and the Avengers Inquisition. This time, tens of thousands of innocent people have suffered such huge losses. All the responsibility lies with our mutants. It is also because when we chose the address to imprison criminals and build the underground prison, we were unable to foresee the current situation. But the occurrence of this disaster has also made us old guys in the old era gradually understand that even if we mutants possess the superpowers to summon wind and rain and change the world, we are ultimately just a group of losers who have survived by chance. We call ourselves mutants, but no matter how we try to hide it, mutants cannot change the fact that they are just a branch of human evolution, because later we discovered through various studies that all humans have varying degrees of mutant genes, it's just that our genes are in an activated state. Perhaps Mr. Roche, the leader of the Terra Star Realm Legion, also has the possibility of obtaining mutant superpowers. Speaking of which, when I was young, my behavior was very extreme, and I could even be described as a cynical murderer. At that time, the only pleasure I could feel was constant fighting with an old friend of mine. We said it was to fight for the survival rights of mutants, but in reality, it was only in this way that I could feel the meaning of my existence as a mutant. But later, a series of major changes gradually brought the relationship between mutants and humans to the brink of a life and death war. Each side paid an extremely heavy price. In the most desperate time, I even considered changing the magnetic poles of the entire planet, so that the whole world and the mutant race would perish together. In the end, it was also my old friend who gave the mutant race a new future at the cost of his own life. His sacrifice completely changed many of my extreme ideas and allowed me to successfully embark on the difficult path of truly becoming a guardian of mutants. Because of this, our hard work has gradually resulted in the current powerful country where mutants can live in peace and even be endlessly supported. In fact, when your Terra Star Realm Legion first announced its existence to the world, we even thought that the heretics you mentioned were referring to our mutant race. For this reason, we even wanted to launch an assassination attempt against you, the leader. However, some things that happened later, such as the complete destruction of the Hydra organization, also made us gradually change our views on the Terra Star Realm Legion led by you, especially the alien invasion in the Battle of New York, which completely made us mutants understand that simple seclusion can no longer allow mutants to maintain their current stable life, because the entire era is changing. So, taking advantage of this opportunity, I would like to invite you, in the name of the Great Elder of the Mutants, to visit our capital city to learn more about us mutants and everything we have carefully maintained under the guidance of our firm beliefs. At this moment, Magneto Max's words had just fallen. Roche, who couldn't help but raise his eyebrows, stared deeply at the other party. He was silent for a moment, then asked with a playful tone, "Mr. Max, if I'm not mistaken, do you want to become allies with our Terra Star Realm Legion and fight together?" Hearing Rock's question, Magneto seemed to let out a sigh, and he said in a deep voice, "According to our intelligence information, you have established an excellent cooperative relationship with the Eastern powers in the Asian region, and judging from their gradually emerging technological creations and a series of social developments, this is undoubtedly an important thing that will benefit future generations. As for Europe, if I am not mistaken, the scattered mess that they are has already become something you in the Terra Star Realm Legion have in your pockets, right? Therefore, although I am the Great Elder of the mutant race, I am also one of the leaders of the entire country. The reason why mutants can gain a foothold in this country and even gain the enthusiastic support of a large number of people is that putting collective interests above personal interests when facing any choice is the only magic weapon for us mutants besides dedication and sacrifice. Of course, if we really establish a deeper cooperative relationship between the two sides in the future, then the interests of all mankind will also become the lifelong goal for all mutants to strive for. At this moment, Magneto's words made Roche, who already had this intention, nod slowly. But he did not immediately make this important decision involving many interests. Instead, he planned to follow the other party to the capital city, to gain a more detailed and in-depth understanding of the existence of mutants. When necessary, Iron Man David, who also bears the responsibility of a great steward, also needs to join the investigation activities and provide important suggestions. The Sky Mothership arrived above the capital city of this mutant nation for the first time. And with the appearance of a square teleportation barrier, Iron Man David, whose eyes flashed with blue light, also came to Rock's vicinity. Subsequently, including Bucky and Thor, at Magneto's personal invitation, the group with different expressions set off for the Winter Palace, the power center of the mutants. However, before the entire team arrived at the Winter Palace, in order to prevent some superficial projects from covering people's eyes and ears, after careful consideration, Roche first asked Iron Man David to handle everything on his behalf. Then, Roche activated his invisibility special talent in front of everyone and drove his power armor towards the depths of the city. He wanted to judge from a more objective external perspective why Magneto wanted to become an ally with them so much. And as time slowly passed, except for a very small number of powerful mutants with particularly keen senses who vaguely noticed Rock's existence, Roche, who had almost traveled to every corner and level of the entire capital city, also gained a general understanding of the mutant country. In this country, people generally seem to believe that superpowers are just the most common tool, not a special talent unique to mutants. In fact, the superpower level of most mutants is not high, and it is basically not lethal. But if you change your way of thinking, then many seemingly useless superpowers will become a very important link for industrial production and even social development. For example, Roche personally saw a female mutant warrior surrounded by many mutant warriors arrive at the capital airport. And from the words of everyone, Roche immediately knew that it was the other party who had completely dyed the gamma radiation of the blue giant into a very eye-catching light pink. However, this female mutant warrior who does not seem to be very old. In fact, from the beginning of her ability's birth, she was a mutant technical backbone responsible for using superpowers to adjust the color of textile fabrics in a large state-owned textile factory. As for her superpower, it is simply to give any substance a specific angle of refraction at the atomic level, and the duration is also divided into permanent and temporary states. So that's how it is. In order to survive, they actually chose to integrate the superpowers of mutants into all aspects of ordinary people's lives. The mutant who made this important decision can definitely be said to be a great man. At this moment, Roche, who was thinking, inadvertently saw a mutant who was using telekinesis to carry cargo in the cabin, and those crew members who seemed to be accustomed to this. He subconsciously let out a sigh from his mouth. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.